Coming up next, The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy. Every Thursday from 4 p.m, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
People are struggling to have conversations and connect with others that they don't completely agree with on every topic. And I think that's probably the biggest problem that we need to try and solve, is how after all this division and after all this separation do we end up bringing people together again, and what does unity really look like?
New Zealand faces some pretty big issues. First one is COVID and the aftermath. There's no getting away from that. Second is racial division. It's been ginned up and it's dangerous. Another issue that maybe people haven't got their head around yet is digital currency. What form does that take? Is it programmable? Will it be used to manipulate behaviour and patterns of behaviour? Those questions need to be asked and answered.
How can you have fair, open, democratic government by people who are appointed? It's a ridiculous idea. And if that idea is taken to its zenith, then this country is in real trouble, because democracy, one person, one vote, where every vote is of equal value, has got to be the foundation of a modern New Zealand.
What's true, what's not true, how our kids are to be educated. And, I have a great fear for the future. I think we know from history where this could end up.
This is The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy, right here on RCR.
Welcome to The Crunch on Reality Check Radio. I'm your host, Cam Slater, and this is the place where we crunch the political issues and cut through the politician's spin. This week I'll be talking to Daniel Newman, Ward Councillor for Manurewa-Hapakura, about Auckland Council's challenges and the challenges he faces in representing one of the poorer areas of Auckland. And then I've got Simon Lusk back on to talk about what strategies the Labour Party needs to adopt to be relevant again. Now, you'll remember Simon, he's the guy who thought Jacinda Ardern was lovely, so don't hold that against him. We'll dip into the mailbag, of course, and I love that part of the show. And we'll close out the show with Cam's buddies and see what they have to say about the fiscal landmines Labour has left lying all over the place. Don't forget to send comments to inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
You're listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
You can call them fiscal cliffs or fiscal landmines, but they're just descriptions of the economic vandalism by Labour. And Labour has left loads of economic landmines for the incoming government to step on. Fortunately, they're being discovered, but each one presents its own unique set of circumstances to diffuse. Labour is the political equivalent of a Hamas IED factory, crafting landmines and other fiscal explosions for the unwary and inattentive to injure themselves with. The latest is the Three Waters debacle. Christopher Luxon's acknowledged that there are significant costs involved in repealing Three Waters. Large sums will be required to pay out contracts cancelled due to the policy change. And some fiscal genius signed up staff with 5-year contracts when they knew this was a contentious policy that was likely to be axed if the government changed. Let's be clear, putting staff and consultants onto 5-year contracts was not an accident. They wanted to make it hard for the new government to roll back Nanaia Mahuta's policy. Loading up these costs was a deliberate and cynical move by the faceless and unaccountable officials under the last government, and it was all done to try and snooker efforts to scrap Three Waters. But there is some good news. The new government's 100-day plan includes dismantling the centralising Three Waters regime. Instead, it'll be replaced with the local water done well policy from the National Party manifesto, which is another naff slogan like, let's get the country back on track. But this is just one of the many landmines, or fiscal cliffs, as Luxon likes to call them, left by the Labour government. These are things that had no ongoing funding or were unfunded in the first place. Treasury warned Labour about this and many other policies and projects, but Labour promised them anyway. An example of that is the funding for the Commerce Commission to regulate Three Waters entities, which is set to dry up next year. Three Waters needs to be stopped, despite the costs associated with doing that. There'll be hundreds of millions of dollars in extra costs if it isn't stopped. But the bottom line is this. This is economic vandalism and sabotage by the Labour Party. Yes, it will cost us millions to add to the millions the previous government wasted on feasibility studies for a cycle bridge across Auckland Harbour, millions spent on planning of the light rail line to the airport, and millions more in multiple ministries that were either wasteful or ineffectual. Labour should call these multi-million-dollar screw-ups Robertsons and keep and publish regular updates on just how much this profligate spendthrift wasted. Grant Robertson will go down in history as our worst finance minister, eclipsing the damage that Robert Muldoon did to the New Zealand economy. National likes to call these fiscal cliffs, but the reality is that they are fiscal landmines, much more dangerous, especially if left in place. The new government needs to sheet home the blame for those to Chris Hipkins, Jacinda Ardern and Grant Robertson, and they need to own the economic vandalism they've perpetrated on the New Zealand economy. In brighter news, though, it appears that National is trying to shed its well-earned image as the party of the status quo, showing Labour, like many others, has misjudged them. Labour put all of this in place on the assumption that National would find it too hard to undo. Well, National, it appears, is ready to grasp the nettle. Time to get on with the slash and burn.
Want an easier way to listen to RCR? Well, you can now download the brand new Reality Check Radio app, both on iOS and Android. We've completed our beta testing, and the app is now live. You can visit the app stores direct or find out all you need to know at www.realitycheck.radio/app. That's at realitycheck.radio/app. Our test bunnies have been hard at play to ensure you have access to everything, from listening to our live broadcast, downloading some of our incredible interviews, and checking out the latest blogs, all from the very same app. So get listening and download the RCR app now.
Daniel Newman is a mate and a good guy. He's also one of the hardest working local body politicians that I know. He's here to discuss the challenges Auckland Council is facing with its 10-year budget and all of the unfunded mandates left by previous mayors and councils. He joins me now. Daniel Newman, welcome to The Crunch.
Good afternoon, Cam. How are you?
Oh, mate, box of birds. Still soldiering on after I had my little fall and little trip to the hospital, but nothing can kill me. I've had strokes, I've had Bell's palsy, and I've had this little thing. It's very hard to keep me down, a little bit like you, really, in politics, isn't it?
Well, the men and women who work on the front lines of the public health system, they do the best job, don't they? The first responders, the doctors and nurses, and the healthcare assistants, by gosh, who do an amazing job, and they do it with a smile, and I have nothing but respect for them.
Yeah, I mean, I've got no complaints about the ambulance service or the emergency department. Everything else after that, those a little bit hit and miss, particularly depends on which hospital you go to. But, I've got no complaints over the care that I've had from our public hospitals, both at North Shore and at Auckland. So, I agree with you. It's a hard job, and they're dealing with all sorts of sick and moaning people when they come into the ED, and they still manage to have a smile, and you just think, well, I'd really like something of what they have been taking.
I don't think I could ever work in the health sector. My wife is training to complete her nursing qualifications at the moment, and I mean, she has a particular passion for aged care, and I love what she does, but I just know that I wouldn't be qualified for it. Some people have certain skills. I'm not one of them. I just have such admiration and respect for people who work on the front lines. So more power to you in your recovery, Cam.
Yeah, well, I don't have the skills to do what you do. I could never be a counsellor. I'm inoculated with truth serum, and if someone who was blessedly stupid came to see me, I'd have to tell them. But I'm not nowhere near as polite as you are, and you keep getting elected, so you must be doing something right.
Well, I'm not sure that I am the world's best counsellor in the eyes of a lot of people, but, I feel like I'm a bit of an overpaid social worker in the role that I've got. My ward in South Auckland I represent some of the wealthiest, some of the poorest, and a whole lot of people in between. What I would describe my constituency as representing is basically New Zealanders who aspire to do better, who aspire to do well in their lives, for their families. And what I try and do is make life a little bit easier for them where I can. Often that means having to say no to people. You have to say no to people. I always say to my colleagues, saying no to people 10 times is about the only way that you can ever potentially get to a position when you can afford to say yes to somebody, because the needs are many, the wants are even more, but your capacity to deliver to people is limited, and that's really, if you're asked to say what is the biggest problem that Auckland Council has grappled with for a long time now and grappled with unsuccessfully, is the legacy of unfunded mandates, commitments that have been made by people through the years with no means of paying for it, no means of addressing the maintenance of our roads, our drains, our parks, our community assets that people care about, that they've paid rates for all these years. And I look at people around that table, there's some great people, and you would have spoken to my colleague and friend Ken Turner, who was passionate about these things.
Absolutely,
about doing the right thing, but it's about trying to, people need to be very mindful that local government can't be all things to all people, but by gosh, there's a lot of people who get elected who try.
Well, that's what Morris Williamson famously says all the time, isn't it? It's everybody wants to get to heaven, but no one wants to die. And that's the problem with local body, isn't it? There's all these wants and demands from the public purse without actually realizing that it's got to be funded, and it's got to be funded in an ongoing way. I mean, this is exactly what George Wood was talking to me last week about, in a couple of projects. One you're very familiar with is the whitewater rafting white elephant that's in Manukau. I'm not sure even 10 people a day would use that place, but the enormous cost and then the ongoing costs of having that foisted on the council is only small beer compared to the massive costs of the Central Rail Loop, which Len Brown pushed forward onto the council with no ability to fund the ongoing maintenance of it.
Yeah, look, I mean, if one of my great challenges in public life is the amount of pressure we tend to put on volunteers, just people who are trying to maintain services, community assets. I've got people who are trying to put a roof over the local tennis club courts in Russell Road in Manarewa. I will get that funded because I will knock on doors, beg, borrow, steal, whatever I can, external to council, to get the funding in to put a roof over the tennis courts in Russell Road. A little bit of support from council, which is great, but the pressure that we put on the volunteers in that club around the accountabilities for what is such an exceptional local project, I wish that we'd put accountabilities on ourselves, because what I can tell your listeners is that the City Rail Link is an unfunded mandate. The contract for that deal was not funded. The liabilities were not crystallised. you will see in the next 10-year plan the exceptional cost of the new stations, i.e. the cathedrals that are being built along that rail loop. Look, great project, but ultimately if you don't have the means to fund the maintenance of it, that is going to be a budget buster. And there's more of them coming. So why am I in public life? I'm in public life in part to try and bring some contestability to the conversation, try and bring a negotiation with central government, but most importantly, to look after my constituents in my ward. Cam, we will, in 2024, we will consult on changing the way in which we do our waste management system for our household rubbish collection service, consulting on whether we should go from weekly to fortnightly. Now, I accept that there are thousands of people, myself included, who don't need to put the rubbish bin out every week. But as an exercise in trying to change the behaviour and habits of people across this vast metropolis of Auckland by dropping the weekly rubbish collection service to fortnightly, it's that kind of thing that motivates me to keep running, because I don't like the idea of introducing inconvenience to the lives of people who need that rubbish collection service. And I sure as heck do not like the idea of fly tipping all over the South Auckland streets. It's already a problem, but we ought to be in public life to provide quiet enjoyment, convenience, and services that people pay for and they expect. They should be regular, consistent, and they should meet the public's need. Those are the sorts of issues that inspire me to keep running, and those are the sorts of things that I need the Auckland ratepayers to think about, because those are the debates that we're going to have, and people won't like it, I'm sure.
Maybe you could suggest that they stop spending $500,000 on raised pedestrian crossings and instead put that into doing proper rubbish collection. It'd be far more beneficial.
Yeah, look, it's remarkable that we've been able to get through nearly over 2,000 years now, and in the time that we have existed in the modern world, we have been able to cross the road safely at signalised pedestrian crossings at grade, where you don't actually need to go over a speed hump, because I think, of course, I want people to travel safely, but that doesn't necessarily require that you've got to put speed humps up and down arterial corridors along the Great South Road, where you have to put your car effectively into neutral as these climb over these raised tables. The reality is that I think that we've got to the point where we are over-engineering aspects of our life to the point where people feel inconvenienced. They can't see the value for money proposition. It's costly. It's time consuming. Every time you dig into the road, you're digging into a road corridor where there's pipes and wires. Every single time you do that, cha-ching, 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 cha-ching. Mm-hmm. You can't just continue to engineer your way to the point where you can't actually do anything other than raise billing hours for consultants, absent doing anything safe. I got a marvellous example in my ward, in the Great South Road outside the Nanaksa Sikh temple. It's a big temple on the Great South Road. It's not for everybody, but it's important to a community of Sikh New Zealanders living in Manurewa and who travel there. Mm-hmm. We want to put a signalised crossing outside of this thing. It doesn't need to be on a raised table. People just push the button, cross the road when it's safe to do so. We could have done that years ago, but the costs blow up because this thing has to, apparently, according to some traffic engineer, has to be raised. Those are the sorts of issues that cause disruption, they increase cost, and they upset people. So Ken Turner will have lots of examples of that, and George Wood will have lots of examples, and Morris Williamson. I've got it too. If only we could just basically say, look, I want to achieve an outcome. It worked 20 years ago, worked 50 years ago. It can work today. It's cost effective. That's what we should be able to do. So it's an arm wrestle, isn't it?
Absolutely. But these raised tables, they're just, I've got a bugbear about them. A, because of the cost, and B, because no one actually asks for them. And yet they get put in. Where I live in Takapuna, there's one particular part of the road where there's 3 of these things, and there's 250 metres from the first one to the third one. And and at the same time, the council has lowered the speed limit on that street to 30 kilometres an hour. So not only do we have everybody going along at 30 kilometres an hour and holding up traffic and everything else, we've got 2 raised tables, pedestrian crossings, then a roundabout, then a third one. It's just nuts.
Well, look, there's no reason for you to drive excessively down a cul-de-sac, for example. Of course, you're going to just bring your car to a low speed down a cul-de-sac. And of course, nobody realistically expects to be speeding outside the school gate during the morning drop-off of the afternoon peak. But if you are a shift worker and you're going off to work at the airport at 3 o'clock in the morning and there's no one else on the road, I don't think that it's essential that you should be travelling at 30 kilometres an hour down the Great South Road to get to your 3 a.m. morning shift. Neither is it likely that you are going to encounter a peloton of leisure cyclists at that hour. So I think that we have to get the balance right. I think the truth of the matter is that there is a policy expectation driven by some who believe that the key attribute to improving the safety of cyclists is to extend motorist travel times by reducing speed to an absolute minimum. There are occasions, there are locations where clearly travelling slowly is optimal. But one blanket rule, I tell you what one blanket rule is a recipe for. It is a recipe for governments to lose elections. And that is one of the reasons why the Labour Party is in such a parlous state at the moment, because ultimately it is in part a byproduct of people feeling frustrated that big government said, we're going to engineer your life to the point where you're safe from yourself. Well, people actually went out and they decided to reverse engineer that policy direction, didn't they? Governments come, governments go, but the policy settings still need to be put right, and that's part of the conversation moving forward.
Well, that's part of the problem with Auckland Transport, isn't it? Because the politicians who stand for election every 3 years come and they go. That's just how it works.
Yes.
But the civil servants, the public servants that are in these almost autonomous departments are still there. And clearly, Auckland Transport is filled with a whole bunch of cycle wombles that want to impede traffic for the very people who actually pay for the roads through road user charges or through fuel excise taxes. They want to impede those people and make it easier for cyclists, who I call them road maggots, because they're feasting off the road and the people who pay for the road. And we've got this situation, like we've got this in Takapuna, a cycleway through Hurstmere Road. No one ever uses it. You've got Puanui Road is another one. I go down Puanui Road twice a week, in Papatoi, and there is never a cyclist on the cycleway. The other cycleway is the one that is on the other side of parallel to Puanui Road, and they've got these, what I call Tim Tams, these little chocolate concrete berms shaped like a Tim Tam spread down the road, where it's all filled with detritus because the street sweepers can't come and sweep it. No cyclist is going to ride in that little narrow protected pace. It's cost us millions of dollars, no doubt, to do all of that, but nobody uses this stuff.
We've got a road maintenance contract. The road maintenance contract requires the road to be maintained, that we have to maintain the substructure, do the seal, do the reseal, etc., etc. Yep. Within this fixed funding envelope, that also has to sweep the streets. When you put those concrete blocks on the road, that creates separation. It's not easy for those big machines to go along and sweep up.
It's impossible
in the cycle corridor. So of course it's filled with debris and rubbish and everything else. Why would a cyclists with half a brain traveling quickly want to use such a route. I mean, frankly, you're likely to burst your tire. It is inconvenient. It is a distraction. A lot of people don't use it. Look, Cam, I've got a view that some of my good colleagues love them as I do, sort of, when they tell you that the critical thing is to create the safest route for students to cycle to school. They have to understand that the world is more complex than that. There are reasons why people can cycle. There are also many reasons why people choose a different mode of transport. I happen to believe that one of the key things that parents want is they want to have choice for their children. Often that choice means that they won't necessarily be going to the school at the end of the street. I've got students in my ward who will shortly be going to a new Catholic secondary school, St. Ignatius in Drury. They will not be cycling there. They will be travelling by bus. They'll be travelling by car. They'll be travelling hopefully by train. There will be different ways for people to do this. And the idea that you can just have one utopic idea of how life will be led, that's what's wrong. Because what you have is a model that doesn't work for many people. And in the end, it doesn't work for anyone because it costs, it can't be maintained, it's inconvenient. People are asking questions why we're doing this. And then you lose the license, you lose the agency to be able to make changes that are required. It's very difficult for me, for example, to say, look, I need to go and sell some assets, but I'm also going to need to raise some revenue. Your rates are going to have to go up. Your services are going to come down. People say, why would you do that when you're out there building bloody cycleways everywhere? And the question is a fair one. And the truth of the matter is that there have to be choices that are made. It would be helpful, frankly, if we had a better sense of direction from the new government through the government policy statement on land transport. I'm hopeful about getting direction there. And ultimately, councils can only fund half this infrastructure if the other half of the funding comes from the New Zealand Transport Agency. If that funding is not available, then council can't go down the path of funding some of these activities. So hopefully we get a real reality check taking place in central government too, because they are our partners and they have been complicit in the past in funding some of this, and they will need to take their fair share of the wax when some of these unfunded mandates are hopefully knocked over.
Well, that's right. I mean, as you drive around doing your constituency work and if you happen to head down Cavendish Drive, at the point where the Cavendish Drive goes under the rail line, have a look at the cycleway just in there as a point of reference. Take some photos, take that along to council and say, why are we doing this? This is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
In terms of the NZTA funding, you're absolutely right, because like Len Brown pushed for the Central Rail Loop. He managed to strong-arm first Labor and then the Key government into partially funding, or I think it was the other way around, actually. It was the Key government, then the Labor government into funding half. But they're not funding half of the $220 million it costs to run the thing every year.
That's right. Look,
they're only funding half the capital cost, but that's not where the expense comes in.
50% of a rail corridor, firstly, the rail corridor should be funded by Kiwi Rail. Len Brown was always great for a photo, wasn't he? But ultimately, Len Brown doesn't pick up the tab. You and I and every other Aucklander out there is going to have to pay the bill for what is an unfunded mandate. So we're talking about a capital cost, 50% cost share for the ratepayers of Auckland is rubbish. I would never have done that deal if I'd been on council at the time. But you're right, there's two subsequent gorillas which will really impede the council's balance sheet for years. The operating cost of this thing, the interest cost of because we have to borrow money to fund this. So we've got an eye-watering interest cost, and then the cost of the depreciation, the operating expense of this thing. That's a killer. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars
every year.
every single year. Look, it would be good if people could understand that we're not that rich. We are not Singapore. We are not New York. We're not London. I'm sick and tired of sitting through sermons where people presume that we have a whole lot of revenue sources at our disposal which put us on par. There's nothing wrong with Auckland, but there is something fundamentally innumerate with thinking that Auckland is as wealthy as some of these other international jurisdictions for which the funding model is very different and the capacity to meet the operating cost is much greater than what it is here in Auckland. In my ward, I've got a ward of 180,000 people. My ward includes some of the poorest people. It includes a lot of first home buyers, includes a lot of pensioners on fixed incomes. They are not well disposed to pay for the operating cost of things in the hope that we can achieve some standard that you would expect elsewhere. We can achieve a good standard here, but we have to cut our cloth to reflect the reality of what we face. And that's very different to what you will see elsewhere. But people's aspirations, good on them for being ambitious, but you still have to be ambitious with the means of delivery. A lot of my colleagues have never actually been in the business of delivering anything, so they struggle.
Yeah, I mean, when you say that you're sick to death of hearing these wonderful ideas about what happens in London or Holland or Amsterdam or God knows where else they dream up as some sort of nirvana that we should be replicating in Auckland, it's almost certain they've never considered the geography of Auckland when making these comparisons. We've got a city that is the largest land area of any city in the world. We're number one. The second is, of course, Los Angeles. But we're actually bigger in terms of land area. And, okay, there's a few little, faults with that description because some of that is water, obviously. But water is a key component of Auckland City. We're on an isthmus that is only 2 kilometres wide at its narrowest part. Everything has to go through that isthmus, and everything all on either side of that and all around it is rather steep hills that are peppered with volcanic cones, none of which is conducive to cycling vast distances. None of it.
Auckland is a region with physical choke points and pinch points. Auckland is also a region of ratepayers and taxpayers who have needs. Those needs need to be met before the wants. Not all the needs are met, and we ought to meet those needs. And the third thing is that Auckland has unfortunately been home to a lot of people who get elected to positions with grandiose ideas, but without the numeracy and the humility to understand that you've got to pay for it. And if you can't pay for it, you've got to pivot. And that's the challenge. Look, Cam, I would be very keen to see the successful completion of a number of these great projects. But, looking out my window, I've got a nice office here on level 26 on 135 Albert Street. I look south, and I look in the direction of what would have been the corridor for light rail if it had ever happened. The reason why light rail will not happen is that we are not a wealthy country. If we were a wealthy country, we could have realistic discussions about delivering these things. But we're not a wealthy country. And even if we were, frankly, I'm not sure of the value proposition. But what I do know is that if you don't bring a sense of commercial reality to decision-making, and if you can't focus on trying to provide convenience and quiet enjoyment to the lives of Aucklanders who are sick and tired of planning without delivery, if you can't deliver on those things, then you shouldn't be in elected public office. And that's the challenge for my colleagues, just as it's a challenge for our parliamentarians. It's one of the reasons why some of them weren't re-elected on the 14th of October. In 2 years' time, I face re-election. I'll see what happens. But if people continue to operate in local government on the basis that they can afford things where clearly they can't, Aucklanders have a right to say you are being unrealistic with the public's expectations and with council's ability or lack of delivery. So I think that elected public office is a great privilege. I appreciate it, but I never take it for granted because every single day I'm having to argue with people, many of whom don't necessarily have what I would call a numeric view about what Auckland can deliver and what Auckland should deliver.
I mean, the Central Rail Loop's a case in point. The ongoing annual costs to run that are in excess of $200 million per annum, with a revenue of only $30 million, with no prospects of that increasing, even though the crowd that pushed this said, if we build it, they'll come. Well, they're clearly not going to come. Even when it's finished, it's been eye-wateringly expensive. It's blown the budget. I think it's double what was originally quoted. And now it's got these enormous costs that I can't ever see being reduced. And now Aucklanders are shackled with these decisions by these myopic and innumerate politicians like Len Brown. And they've saddled the debt and they've swanned off to do whatever they're doing with no accountability. It rips my undies, and it certainly appears to rip a few people's undies, but nowhere near enough of the ratepayers are suffering enough pain to say stop all of this nonsense.
I thought it was always going to be the case that when you enter into a contract without negotiating a limit to one's liability, without negotiating a fixed price, without negotiating a realistic deliverable time, that was always a recipe for great risk to Aucklanders. Secondly, you are talking about tunnelling technology. That we don't necessarily tunnel every day in New Zealand, so we procure the services of professionals that can come in from Europe. Come out here from Europe, stick your boring machine in the ground, tunnel halfway, stop and say, I'm doing no more unless we can renegotiate with you, Aucklanders, New Zealanders, about what we now expect to be paid to complete the job. That's what's happened. And that's what's going to cost. And it will cost and cost and cost. The truth of the matter is there are people in this country in positions of trust and leadership who have not necessarily negotiated good deals for ratepayers and taxpayers. It's nice to be able to cut ribbons. It's nice to be able to virtue signal, but you have to deliver things. And that is the great challenge at the moment. My role as a councillor is to try as best I can to limit the exposure of legacy unfunded mandates for which we have signed up to on very unfavourable terms, I might add, but to try and limit that exposure and to prevent us from repeating those same mistakes by entering into new contracts in the future, which would, unless carefully considered, would leave us in the same position or worse again. So that's the big challenge at the moment. And I hope that your listeners are going to be very cautious in the future and consider, well, are those promises funded or is it an unfunded mandate? Because if it's an unfunded mandate, if they want to know who's ultimately is going to pick up the tab for that, they just need to go and consult their bathroom mirror, because almost certainly the costs will fall back on them. And they probably can't afford it.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, particularly in your ward. As you say, you've got, some of the poorest New Zealanders, but also some of the wealthiest. Mm-hmm. As an aside, I was brought up as a kid in Manurewa. That's what we used to call it back then. They call it something different now. And when the school that I went to needed a school hall, the community fundraised for it and built that school hall. It's still there to this day. Dad was the chair of the committee that did the fundraising for Hill Park School. And it was a great suburb to be brought up in. I mean, I went to Cubs and Scouts and down on Alfriston Road there at the Scout Hall, went to primary school there, and it was a great upbringing. And yet South Auckland's maligned quite badly by the rest of Auckland. even though there's these wonderful communities where people can safely bring up their children. But Auckland Council has neglected South Auckland too. And I remember when I used to be doing road maintenance or park maintenance for Manukau City Council, and there was a very definite difference in the parks that were on one side of the motorway compared to the other side of the motorway for where maintenance money was spent. We were constantly fixing parks in Howick and out that way, and constantly being told by the council not to do anything around Clendon Park.
Yeah. And the legacy of that is still something that we're having to address today, and it's hard work. Look, I'm getting some really good progress in terms of the maintenance of some of my facilities now, but what I would describe it as I'm having to work 2.5 times harder than some people in order to achieve that. It doesn't help that I have to share my award with a colleague who has a very different vision of the world, but we won't go into that. But, it is tough. It is tough to be able to deliver the best possible outcomes. Look, this isn't well known outside of my community, but concurrent to my role as a councillor, I'm also deputy chair of a licensing trust. Now, people will have views about that. The licensing trust that operates in my community in Wiri, that doesn't have a monopoly on the sale and supply of beer, wines and spirits at the local pub, but it operates and successfully and responsibly, and it generates some revenue. And what I can tell you is that I am working deliberately to upgrade every single community-owned sports club facility asset in Monarewa and as much as I can in Papakura as well. And we will do that as much as possible, because I can't be bothered waiting around for some bureaucrat to tell me when I should and should not do it. We'll just go and fund these improvements and renewals externally, and we are doing that. I can do that quite easily, actually, with the community-owned assets. The council-owned assets is a whole different matter. I've got to go and consult a bureaucrat in a work program that goes on indefinitely without much progress. But the community-owned assets, we will do them, and we'll do them well. Why do we do them? Because the community needs them, because it's actually good to get kids off the couch and playing sport and being constructive and getting high on life in a healthy way, down at your local park. And we will do that because I do have an aspiration for doing the very best I can for the working communities of South Auckland, which is why that roof is going to go on the tennis club courts in Russell Road, which is why we're building an indoor training facility for all year round cricket at Memorial Park, which is why the rugby club got its new roof, which is why squash is going to get a new facility shortly down Weymouth Road. And there are countless other projects. I'm doing it not because the council said it needed to be done. I'm doing it because it needed to be done. And the truth of the matter is that the test for your listeners is, are your elected officials people who are implementing a plan to achieve good outcomes locally? Because most people judge the quality of life in a very local context, how it affects them, how it affects their household, how it affects their neighbourhood. Truth of the matter is, Cam, Hill Park School is a great school. Gavin Bear, the principal there, is a good friend of mine, doing a great job. They're good people, and the families that go there are good people, but they're also good people under stress, under pressure.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. When decision makers don't reflect policy priorities that provide for convenience to the lives of people, such as the parents and the kids who go to Hill Park School, that's when you had the problems. So I'm very hopeful that in my time in public office, we can continue to do useful things. But here's another priority, Cam. I want the new government to make good on its promise to make these mixed density residential zoning requirements optional. And if they can do that, then I want us to basically exit Plan Change 78 and try and bring some peace to the lives of people. He was scared that because of plan changes in Auckland, that it's quite possible for Kāinga or Housing New Zealand, as they should be known, to go and build these 3x3 concrete towers on your boundary fence. We ought to be in Auckland a little bit more sympathetic to the people that have built this place and who just want to enjoy it peacefully, quietly, and with a sense of reverence for the traditions that have been used to establish those neighbourhoods such as Hill Park.
Yeah, really good points. And I think part of that comes down to the lack of attention that local body, particularly in Auckland, matters are covered by media. I'm only aware really of two journalists, one of which is just retired, Todd Nile, who was a fine journalist. I actually never knew what his politics was, and he always seemed to cover everything from a pure journalism point of view, finding out what the facts were, finding out what either side on a particular issue had, and then publishing those. And the other is Bernard Orsman, another fine journalist who unfortunately works for a shabby paper called the New Zealand Herald. But that's about it. That's about the only scrutiny that happens. Of course, we've got, opinion writers like Simon Wilson who think that everything that a left-wing mayor or councillor puts up is just brilliant, especially if it involves cycling or riding scooters or some other stupid form of transport that's just not suitable. They're all for that. And therefore, they don't actually question, they become cheerleaders rather than actually questioners of these policies that land us with, as you call them, unfunded mandates. And I wonder if perhaps, I don't know what the solution is for that. Certainly you only hear from councillors when they're squawking about something. It seems to be difficult to actually get proper coverage of what the real issues are. And if people were more aware of the innumerate public policy that was being foisted on us, then maybe the citizens might be a little bit more angry.
Yeah, look, I think that there has been a trend over a long period of time for so-called merged, amalgamated decision-making. You take things at a very macro scale. It's so big that the more that decision-making and decision-makers become remote to you, the less you will have a sense of understanding what they're doing and holding them to account. Picking up the phone to your elected officials and challenging that is not something that people do every day. And that's a shame, because if more of them did, you would see a response. I was fascinated the other week. I was at the town hall and that there was an enormous crowd of people that came in from Takapuna talking about some coastal walkway. I'm not going to go into the pros and cons of what they were talking about. Point being, they were there and they were pissed off.
Yep.
And they weren't going anywhere. And you could tell the people sitting around the table with me were uncomfortable because they're not used to a gallery full of upset Aucklanders. And I think that we should have more upset Aucklanders bearing witness. It's amazing what happens when politicians can look across and see an audience. And it's an audience of people who are inquiring, who are interested, and who are determined to report on these things and hold you to account. Now, the truth of the matter is that the decisions are not taken when the audience is sitting there. The decisions are taken after lunch when the audience has gone home. That's when the decisions are taken, and therein lies the problem. In my own life and my own approach to it from my perspective of an Auckland councillor for the Manarewa Papakura Ward is I actually get the best sense of grounded feedback from my constituents door knocking. It's a great way to basically empower myself, because when I'm door knocking, my opponents have no ability to persuade the outcome of conversations on the doorstep, because they won't do it.
Yeah.
When you're out there door knocking and you're listening to people on their terms, on their doorstep, it's incredibly enriching. It's time consuming. I've knocked on about 4,000 doors since the last election, and I've got one of the safer wards around the Auckland region. It's safer because I door knock it. I never take it for granted. But when you door knock and you listen to people, it's amazing what they're prepared to tell you, because often they're quite shy, but they'll tell you one-on-one, and that's what we should be doing a lot more of. Listening to people who are prepared to inquire, listening to people who are prepared to be a witness, and also listening to people who are shy, because the shy Aucklanders are generally people who are going about their daily lives and they're trying to get by, and people are specialising in just getting by, but they're the ones that are doing it tough. And they're talking to me on the doorstep and they're saying to me, Daniel, we really want to keep our weekly rubbish collection service. We don't want to see concrete Tim Tams all over our local roads. And for goodness sake, can you please get the lawns clipped down the local pocket park, because we want to basically be able to walk through there without it being overgrown and littered in a location of choice for field mice. So, local government can do remarkable things for Aucklanders simply by doing the basics well and dialing back on the unfunded mandates that would otherwise just increase cost and cynicism. If we just focused on doing the basics well, that would be a mighty good start.
That's what most people, I imagine, say to you when you knock. And by the way, knocking on 4,000 doors since the last election, I would bet that no other councillor out there has knocked on any doors since the election, and they'll do it about 3 months out from the next election. That's when they'll start again. So all credit to you for continuing to knock on the door. But I'll bet you the first thing that people say to you in almost every instance is, why can't the council just do the basics? We don't need all of this extra stuff, these nice to have things, when you can't even fix the potholes in the roads, when you can't mow the berms, or you can't keep the footpaths and the access ways in the parks maintained. You can't mow the parks, all of those sorts of things. Those are what people actually want. It's what they use. Nobody wants a situation where the city's sanitation gets out of hand because we're now no longer collecting rubbish in a time frame that's suitable for how people live their lives. It's crazy stuff. Mm-hmm. But you're actually out there listening to those people, and not enough councillors are doing it. Maybe the council needs to have a mandated door knocking period on a Friday afternoon or something, so that they can actually get some grounding into what people are annoyed at and what needs fixing.
Look, new candidates come to me sometimes and say, Daniel, what should we do? I say, well, go and buy a pair of walking shoes and come with me. And, well, they do that. It gets hard after the first 6 doors because you've got to keep going. And then I get people say, oh, well, it's raining today. I'll stay home. Well, look, people are at home on rainy days, so go and talk to them.
I feel sorry for you too when you tip up and you absolutely
right. Who is this poor sod that's it's Daniel. I knock on a lot of doors and people open them. I'll get a Daniel.
Yeah.
That's when I know that I'm having an effect, because the word gets out and you build the perception. The perception is actually based on the reality. You're out there doing it. There's more doors than 4,000 in my ward, but I'm doing my best. Look, I think that it would be an incredibly empowering thing it would be incredibly empowering for people at every level of government, wherever they are around this country, to do a bit of door knocking. And when they door knock, don't go there with a sermon, go there with an open mind and listen to what people have to say. I really enjoy listening to people who have a view on the doorstep that I fundamentally disagree with. Because I think, it's good to have that discussion. It's good to understand why people think the way they do. I want people to tell me what problems they have that I might reasonably be able to assist them with. But I like people to be able to tell me why I'm wrong so that I can have a think about it. It doesn't mean to say they're going to change my mind, but we can have a good old discussion about I enjoy people forming friendships with me for whom I don't share their politics, and they know they don't have them. They're not on the same side as me, but I enjoy them because life is different. Too many people in public life are only prepared to listen to views that they like,
Yeah.
You ought to be able to open your mind to views that you don't like, and maybe you'll learn something. I've been prepared to change my mind on occasion. It's a good thing. But as long as you have that discussion, and I can tell you, Cam, it's a lot of people in my ward whose politics are different to me, but they'll vote for me first.
Yeah, well, that's right, because you're actually listening to them. Yeah, and that's, when people come to me and say they want to get into politics, I said, what do I need to learn? I say to them, well, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, and that's the ratio you should use them in. And then the smart ones will come back at you with some sort of stupid answer. And then the ones who are a little bit sharper than that will think about that and go, okay, I get that now. But often too, if you are doing that, if you are talking less than you're listening, the person you're talking to may actually have a solution to something that you hadn't thought of yet, because they look at things from a different perspective. And so if you cut that off, that discourse, then you're potentially cutting off potential solutions.
Look, I it's not my usual practice necessarily to go and listen to every news broadcast on television. But I was watching a clip of a constituent of mine called Marama Davidson on the microphone in Epsom yesterday screaming about how the new government hates workers. Well, I actually think that any government that is supporting people to go and work is probably not a government that hates you. It's a government which is probably trying to help you to become a worker.
Help you to help yourself.
I think that we should actually recognise that working for a living is a good pastime. I would really like to sit down with Marama, who I know, and I share pleasantries. I would describe them as courteous pleasantries, but that's about it. And say to her, look, can you open your mind to the idea that you might be wrong and just come and live the lives of people who have a different point of view to you, and then consider why they form their views, and maybe you might have a perspective which is not as informed as you might otherwise have thought. And there's a few people in public life that I would like to do that with. I don't think she'll do that because it doesn't sort of meet her expectations, but that's one of the things that I think people should do, and that is to check in as to whether their views and opinions are necessarily fair and accurate on every occasion. Look, you and I will almost certainly have very different views about many things, and that's fine, but it's important to keep an open mind. And there have been times in my life where I don't think I've been as reasonable and discerning as otherwise could be about views that I don't agree with. But you've really got to push the envelope out there and have an open mind in public life.
It reminds me of the song "Walk a Mile in My Shoes" by Joe South.
Yes.
The lyrics of which, if I could be you and you could be me for just 1 hour, if we could find a way to get inside each other's minds, if you could see through my eyes instead of your ego, I believe you'd be surprised to see that you've been blind. That's probably a perfect song to bookend this interview, really. You're suggesting that people need to walk a mile in someone else's shoes in order to understand where they're at. Exactly the challenge that you've made there for Marama Davidson, that to walk a mile in someone else's shoes.
Yeah, absolutely, Cam. And maybe I need to go and spend a bit more time on the back of a bike somewhere, but it won't probably be down one of those little narrow cycleways on Cavendish Drive, but I need to keep an open mind too.
You could do that as a learning experience, Daniel. You could head out there, cycle it, video it, and then take that to council and say, look, we've got a problem, guys.
We most certainly do. Well, there's a big problem if it's me cycling it, because I don't think there'll be many others around me, that's for sure. But look, I just want to wish you and your listeners at Reality Check Radio all the very best for the Christmas and holiday season. I wish peace and goodwill to all. I'd be delighted to come back in the new year sometime and have a chat, and we'll sort of catch up as to where things are going around council. I think you are raising important points, and I think your listeners need to be thinking about these things too, and challenging and inquiring and asking questions and providing feedback. And certainly if I come knocking on your door, don't be afraid to open it, because I'm only there to help.
Yep. And that's, you're one of the most effective councillors that I know. And I've watched your career for a number of years, Daniel, and there's a reason why you keep getting elected, and you just keep doing that. And all the best for the Christmas period and the new year for you. But we'll definitely be touching base a fair bit next year. So thank you very much for coming on to The Crunch.
Look after yourself, mate. Blessings to you and the family. And I'm signing off now, but Merry Christmas, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah, all the best, Daniel. See what I mean about hardworking? Most local body politicians stop door knocking the day of the election. Not Daniel. Sheesh. I mean, he's knocked on 4,000 doors in the past year. No wonder he keeps getting elected. Tell me your thoughts on what Daniel had to say by emailing inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
This is The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy, right here on RCR.
Simon Lusk is a hunting buddy of mine, and we've also done plenty of political hunting together, but that'll probably be for our book. I've asked him back, despite his views on Jacinda Ardern, to see if we can plot a course for the Labour Party to find their way forward. He joins me on the line now. Welcome back to The Crunch, Simon Lusk. You're famous on The Crunch as the person who said Jacinda Ardern was nice. We had so much email about that.
Well, that's quite incorrect, Cam. I never said she was nice. I said she was lovely.
Well, now we'll have even more emails.
Well, I also said that she was thick and not competent, but she was genuinely lovely.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on thick and not competent, but we'll have to disagree on the lovely. Although I did have lunch with her in 2008, but David Farrar was besotted with her at the end of that lunch, and I said to him, she's as dumb as a bag of hammers, David. How can you like that? And he says, oh, well, I think she's going places. So maybe he was right and I was wrong. But
Maybe. I have huge admiration for her as a person and almost none as a politician. She was an abject failure as Prime Minister and really failed to deliver on any of her key promises.
And that's the key thing, isn't it? Labor's sitting there with Chris Hipkins boxing on, mainly because there's nobody else to replace him. But they're sitting there thinking that the electorate got it wrong, and they haven't had the nous to sit down and think, well, actually, is it a legacy of all the over-promising and under-delivering? Or is it a legacy of our nanny statism? Or is it a legacy of the divisiveness that has occurred as a result of the policies we push through? And so it seems that they seem a bit directionless. It's almost like they're relying on people to wake up. And we saw this in 2002, didn't we, when Bill English arrogantly thought he was going to win the election because the voters got it all wrong and Labor will only be in for one term and then we'll get back in. It's the same sort of thinking that we're seeing now with Labor, isn't it?
Well, and the 9 years for the 3 elections with John Key, where he beat them, absolutely smashed them, really, and they just kept waiting for people to think John Key was something other than what he was, which was both competent and likeable. He might not have done very much, but no one could accuse him of not being competent, and his likability remained very high.
I mean, most people would welcome to have a drink with John Key. Very few people would want to have a drink with Chris Hipkins, but that's probably because he drinks shandies.
Oh, and pink cocktails while he's watching the Boxing Day Test match. I mean, yeah, I think part of being in the modern Labor Party is you got to hand in your man card, and it's why guys like Nashi and Chainsaw never really did that well in there, because they wouldn't.
So what is the Labor Party going to do moving forward, or what should they do? I've got some ideas. You've got some ideas. Let's chew the fat on this one and see if we can steer them in a direction that might see them being competitive at the next election?
Well, the first thing they've got to do is concentrate on winning a majority in Parliament. And, if they concentrate on anything else, they're largely wasting their time. They've got to get to 61 or whatever the majority is in Parliament, and they've got to probably do that via a coalition. If they spend their whole time navel-gazing about whether they need a wealth tax or something, it's just not relevant. And no one really wants to vote for someone that looks backwards all the time either. They need to be looking forward. And, they've got bloody good pollers in Talbot Mills. Those guys know what they're doing. They've been around for ages, and they learnt from Fat Tony, who was a genius. And, they should spend very, very heavily on research in the next 6 months, especially the qualitative stuff. They need really deep-seated research to understand what the public are thinking, what the public care about, where they got it wrong and where the opportunities are. What do people think of Luxon, and what are their attack lines on Luxon? What are the criteria for success? While it can't be done with Chris Hipkins, they really seriously need to be thinking about who goes and buys a case of whiskey and goes and has a peace conference with New Zealand First. They probably won't, because they now think Winston is evil, but they probably should do that. But in principle, what they've really got to do is work out the issues that matter to voters and fight on those. And don't fight the last war, and don't spend too much time worrying about things that won't have much impact. Like, if Winston wants to have a go at the media for being biased, well, I think our good mate Farrer has proven that most New Zealanders, including half of Labor voters, think they are biased. So stop fighting them on that and start fighting on the cost of living, or immigration, or something where they can make a material difference to people's lives rather than just nibbling around the edges.
I've seen a few of I describe them as hard left media commentators saying that if only Labor had brought in a wealth tax as their policy mix, if only they had extended capital gains tax, if only they had removed GST off fruit and vegetables, all of these things that they've been talking about. And they seem to think that we'll vote for more taxes. And the empirical evidence suggests that the opposite is true. If you propose new taxes or more taxes, very rarely do you succeed. I mean, Helen Clark famously raised the top tax rate, but she said it was only going to apply to 5% of taxpayers. I mean, it was a lie. It applied to far more than 5%. But she's the only one I can think of that got away with proposing an increased tax. Albeit on a small portion of the population.
And I think this is something that the left don't understand. They don't. The average voter doesn't mind people being wealthy. They like to think that they one day might make it, and they also think that the government wastes most of the money they get, so they resent paying taxes. So more taxes is not an issue that's going to win you votes on. It's just not. We've got to tax these people more. And why? You guys just wasted anyway. And, that's one of the things they're going to have to deal with. They set up a whole lot of useless bureaucracies that have cost a vast fortune, and service has gone down. Our education system is an abject failure, and our health system is just way worse than when National were in power. And they've got to get their heads around, the difference between spending money and delivering results.
We've seen this with a number of politicians. I mean, Stephen Joyce wrote an article about a week ago in the New Zealand Herald where he was this newfound fan of devolution and putting decision-making out to the regions. But he was the minister that created MBIE, this massive ministry that centralised a whole lot of work streams around, and now he's saying that we need to have devolution. And in some respects, I agree with them. There seems to be in the Labour Party this preponderance of thinking that central government knows best, and that we're best to merge all the polytechs, merge all the hospitals and health boards and everything else, merge everything into this one big amorphous beast that is sitting there in Wellington sucking the life out of the New Zealand economy. And they never seem to have, I mean, the last rational thought they had about this sort of stuff was when Roger Douglas was their finance minister. And maybe they need to start thinking about these things more.
Well, I think that, the whole argument about centralisation or decentralisation is just, I live in Hawke's Bay. No one cares. They just don't care. And this is the trap that Labor fall into. They think that people actually do care. And if they just could educate them a bit more, they would. What they do care, what the voters here are listening for is, how are you going to make my life better? How are you going to get the cost of living down? How are you going to make housing more affordable? Because bloody hell, Kiwi Build was just a disgrace. I mean, you guys were just useless. We've got to have a plan that will work. And, Labor need a plan that they can say, this will work, unlike in the last 6 years. That's a really important point. They need to be thinking about probably the 97% of people that aren't interested and aren't listening. And how do you get some cuts through to them? And I don't know that they, that if they want to keep going on about centralisation and big bureaucracies, you turn up at the A&E ward and you don't get seen for 12 hours, or all you think is the government's useless, not, oh, it's great, we've got a new bureaucracy. And that's the kind of thing where the voters just have lost trust in government a lot because Labor was so inept and couldn't deliver anything. And, they've got to work hard on saying our plans will work this time because we have done this, not, we dreamed up 100,000 houses for Kiwi Build without addressing the problems of building houses to begin with.
I mean, take the health sector, for example. I mean, Andrew Little, in the middle of a pandemic, had this rush of shit to the brains where he thought, we'll reorganise the health system, we'll get rid of all the health boards, we'll give them some flash Maori names, and issued all these badges. All the staff have got their Te Whatu Ora badges on and everything. But the services never improved. Nothing changed.
Went backwards.
It went backwards in many respects. And people are sitting there thinking, why is the Labour Party fighting over Maori names for government departments when the government departments don't bloody work in the first place? I mean, they want the health system to see them quickly. They want the roads to have no potholes and to be fixed and repaired, with great alacrity. They don't want some fancy. I mean, I imagine you're getting the same feedback that I'm getting from people on the street where they're saying, thank God we can actually say things as they are now without these woke wombles, frowning at us because we're not pronouncing something correctly or whatever.
And I think that leads on to really Labor's biggest strategic opportunity, although I'm not sure that they will really embrace it, which is coalition politics. They need to have a coalition to form a government. And they've got the absolute Fruit Loop Greens who are going to take up all the loony Green vote. But they've also got the Maori Party. And the Maori Party is always going to out-Maori Labor. And there's no point in Labor fighting them because it only takes left-wing votes. Labor has to move to the middle and expand the coalition towards the middle. And, getting into an argument about what a government department is called when no one really knows what it is or how to pronounce it, it just doesn't have any bearing on the average person's life. It is as Matt Goodwin in the US. In the UK writes, he always talks about it being the luxury belief class. The luxury belief class here thinks that all this te reo is going to change the way that Maori succeed in New Zealand. And it defies common sense. That means that you probably, your mate Willie Cam, who's a bloody good guy, and I love reading what he writes. I don't agree with much of it, but at least he tells us what he thinks, which most of them don't. And, good on him for that. But if Labor try and out-Maori the Maori Party, they're just going to alienate a whole lot of immigrants and a whole lot of white working-class voters who should be voting for Labor because they'll be going, you bastards care more about those people than you do about me, so I'm not going to vote for you. And, that is what they will be thinking and what they have done. So they've got to get away from the trap of the treaty because it won't win elections. And I would spend quite a lot of time getting Maori elected. They're wonderful candidates, far better than anyone else. But, you need to be talking about results for Maori, not te reo. housing, education, health, employment, and results, not bureaucracies. The whānau here, my fiance is Maori, and the whānau are all, they care about things like, are there going to be enough houses? Are the kids going to get a decent education? Can they get nanny in to see a doctor when they need to? They don't really care that much about te reo, and quite a lot of them, their kids have learnt the reo at home, and now they're in normal schools learning English because they've already got it. And, arguing that kind of stuff just puts people off. And I'm sure the qualitative research would say that if they got Talbot Mills to do the work and they actually listened to them. And that leads on to the next point, which is, they really probably should sit down with the Maori Party and say, guys, you're going to look after the Maoris. We've got to win over the middle ground, and then we can work together to improve things and that we all agree on. But why not get your voters to party vote Labour, and we'll get our voters to electorate vote Maori, and we'll create a bigger overhang, and we'll make it harder for the right to do all the things that we don't want them to do by being in government. And that is something that a sensible Labour Party would be considering. Now, I don't believe they will. I think that the luxury belief people in the white urban liberals all couldn't stomach that, and the Maori part of the caucus would be, oh no, we've got to win over Maori voters, they're ours. But, you and I, we're pretty cold-blooded about these things. We'd do anything to win if we were running Labour, and we would go and have that chat with the Maori Party.
But it seems to me that the Labour Party has a problem now, and it's their coalition partners. Because if you vote Labour, you're going to get the Fruit Loops and the Greens, who don't say anything sensible ever, who seem to like playing dress-ups as much as the Maori Party like playing dress-ups in Parliament. But by and large, they're not an environmental party. They're a hard left socialist party, if not communist in many regards. And then you've got the Maori Party that has morphed from something that was respected when it was run by Tariana Turia and Peter Sharples into something where they're actually a laughingstock, and most people are laughing at them, not with them.
Yeah, well, I think that they have a substantial constituency. I think there is a constituency for both the Greens and the Maori Party. And if you're just looking to get to 61 votes in Parliament, you've got to work out what is the most efficient way of doing it. And you can shave off some of the loony stuff that those parties want to do from your own portfolio. So Labor becomes a sensible mainstream party that's okay to vote for the average voter. You've still got to deal with them in government, but you're better off dealing with them in government than fighting them in opposition.
Yeah, I mean, still, if you're trying to convince that squishy middle to not vote for National, because, I mean, let's face it, that's where the squishy middle sits, is in the National Party at the moment, and go with Labour, then having the lunatics of the Greens and the racists of the Maori Party as your only potential coalition partners because of your decisions that you've made over a period of time isn't going to, endear voters to wanting to swap across to the Labour Party. Because if you vote for Labour, you get them.
Definitely not. They really need to, when they cut Hipkins' throat, which I'm sure they will be forced to at some point, they need the first move is they've got to turn up at New Zealand First Caucus with a big case of whiskey and sit there and drink it with them and have a peace conference. That would give them more flexibility to move further to the right and stop the loonies on the left from causing too many problems. And none of this is particularly it's not rocket science. And the guy that writes the best on all of this kind of stuff, in my view, is a Pommy guy called Matt Goodwin, who's got a great Substack site. And he's written a brilliant book called Values, Voice and Virtue, which is basically how the left in Britain has managed to alienate their traditional working class voters. And the same applies in the US. And I think the same applies here. They emphasise values of the luxury belief class rather than the values of the people that are working hard to get ahead. They've denied them the voice that they had in Parliament because there's very few working class people left in the Labour Party. And their view of virtue is doing stupid stuff on trans and things like that rather than what the average working class voter thinks. And, I'd be making that mandatory reading for every member of the Labor caucus, and look at what can be implemented that he talks about in Britain here. And the first thing that I'd be implementing is a really aggressive policy on immigration, to reduce immigration, to get housing prices down and services, public services available to New Zealanders, because that's just something that is offensive when you see all these new people turn up, block the roads, take the houses, take the and clag up your schools and your health system. And I go, well, why are we letting these people in? Because they're also driving our wages down. And that argument could be a very, very powerful one for Labor if they can get their heads round. They've got to stop going on about virtue and looking after the minorities and start looking after hardworking New Zealanders.
And hardworking New Zealanders are the majority. Although I was shocked to see the other day some statistics, particularly around the Labor Party's unfunded promises that Treasury were absolutely slating after the fact. Shame they never said it beforehand. But they said that Labor's promises around infrastructure and what they were wanting to spend was going to require the magical appearance of 100,000 skilled workers. And then in the article, it went on to say that the current workforce is around 880,000 people. Either it was a typo, or it just shows how few working people there are in New Zealand. I mean, I think 180,000 seems rather small. I mean, I think 1.8 million might be more appropriate, given we've got a population of 5 million.
Yeah, look, I think that there's some big issues in terms of getting people who aren't working back to work, and it's not unique to New Zealand. Britain now has 1 in 5 working age adults on a benefit or out of work benefit, and I'm sure that we have a similar sort of problem where, for both structural reasons and because we just let bludgers get away with it, they stay on the benefit for life rather than getting out and working. And there's plenty of jobs. But we're not really pushing them. Now that, if Labor were really serious, they'd say, look, our name states what we believe in. You work. We're the Labor movement. We're not the bludger movement. We're not the beneficiary movement. We believe in everyone having to do their bit for society, and that means working. And I think that the other really, one of the best lines I think I've ever heard in politics was when Julia Gillard rolled Kevin Rudd, and she said, I want to be the Prime Minister for the Australians that work the hardest, not those who complain the loudest. And I think too often here,
great
Labor,
line, isn't it?
You just think, well, that's bloody right. And that should be Labor's mantra. We want to look after the New Zealanders that work hardest, not those that complain the loudest. And they'd have all sorts of people saying, hallelujah, someone finally gets it. I really resent the fact that I'm, doing 2 jobs. I'm getting up really early and I see my useless bloody neighbour who's been on a benefit for years and sells a bit of dope and plays spaceys all night. He never does anything, and I'm expected to work my guts out so he can afford to play spaceys and smoke dope. And, that's not the kind of thing that you'd hear anyone in Labor talk about, and it probably should be, because it's their voters that are now thinking, I can't trust Labor. They want to sell me out to everyone that isn't like me, and they don't believe that my beliefs are worth having. You got to be so careful around what you say with the rainbow community, and you can't say bad things about transvestites. And it's like, oh, come on, just as Obama said, perhaps we should be a little less judgmental, and we should understand that that the frustrations of people are not the frustrations of the well-off, educated people. The people who are struggling to pay their mortgage or their rent, and they're struggling to buy their kids their school uniforms and pay for a little bit of extra. And they're the people that Labor need to concentrate on, not the people that complain the loudest.
I mean, I can't even see Labor saying that, but I can see Winston saying it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think he'd love saying it. But you think of Julia Gillard's remarkably unsuccessful tenure, and I watched her first press conference, and that was in her first speech. And she had me thinking, oh, yeah, that's bloody good. Yeah, and I was not predisposed to like the Labor Party in Australia, and other things that she did, which were she just didn't dwell on identity. Someone said, "Oh, you're proud to be the first woman prime minister," and she said, "Well, I'm the first ranger too." And just took the piss out of the identity people. And was, it didn't mean much. She was prime minister. Her gender didn't have any bearing on it any more than her red hair did.
Well, we saw in New Zealand the media and the left-wing lovies bent out of shape when Ginny Shipley became New Zealand's first woman prime minister. And we had this crazy construct in the media when Helen Clark was finally elected that she was the first woman elected prime minister. It was just a joke, that they pushed that. But that's what those identitarians, I like to call them, do. And the Labor Party seems to have more than its fair share of them. They've almost got as many as the lunatic Green Party, despite this disparity in sizes of the parties. And this identitarian stuff has headed them down a cul-de-sac, I feel. I mean, I was reading a Spectator article on how progressivism has ankle-tapped the Democratic Party, and I'm sitting there reading the article, and I thought, I could just change Democrats for Labor, and it'd be exactly the same for New Zealand.
Yeah, and I think that's probably where Labor need to start thinking about what the information they're consuming. They need to be consuming things like the Spectator and people that are critical of them, rather than perhaps the New Statesman or the Guardian, which is affirming their own views. Listen to the views that are different to yours and see if you can apply some of that knowledge. And it's not exactly hard, but I don't know that they're going to have the intellectual curiosity to work that out. And that's perhaps one of their greatest weaknesses. Now, I've talked politics with Michael Bassett for a very long time now, and he said that, the really smart people in the Labor Party when he was serving in the 70s and 80s, they had really inquiring minds. They were, before the internet, they were seeking out good international journals and reading them, like the New Republic or the Atlantic. He said one of his colleagues, he read The Economist every week, and he was one of the most well-informed people in Parliament because he had an inquiring mind and he just knew what was going on around the world. And that it's harder now with the amount of information that's coming through, but you do need to inquire, and you probably need to ration the time that you spend reading left-wing stuff if you're in Labor, and spend more time reading the stuff from the right to find out what they're thinking and why and what their people are thinking, because you've got to win them over, not win over the people that have voted for the Greens or the Maori Party, because that doesn't get you any closer to a majority in Parliament.
It's funny you say that, because just earlier on the show I was talking to Daniel Newman, and he said exactly the same thing, that he finds door knocking, talking to people on the street, their politics may be different from mine, but I'm still going to listen to them because they might actually have a solution to a particular problem that's vexing other constituents. And if I only talk to the people that I agree with, then I'm just going to form an echo chamber, and we're not actually going to get solutions for the constituents. And I thought that was an admirable attitude to have for a local body politician, but indeed for a national level politician.
You just got to get out there and find out why people aren't voting for you, and what you can do to persuade them otherwise. And what is it that will change the key demographics vote? Labor managed to lose about half their vote from the previous election.
I mean, that's staggering.
What was the cause?
When you think about it. Yeah, I mean, what was the cause of it? I mean, obviously there was lack of performance and being gaslit. I mean, people were sick of being gaslit, being told that their life was better off. I mean, this is what I said to a couple of Labor politicians that I was talking to, and they said, "Oh, we're going well." And I said, "No, you're not." And they said, "Oh, well, why do you say that?" And I said, "Well, because I'm talking to people that you should be talking to, and they're telling me that life sucks, that you've told them that you've lifted all of these children out of poverty. If you went to any one of those households and said to them, do you consider yourself to being lifted out of poverty? They'd all have said no. My kids are going to the same shitty schools. We still live in the same shitty street with the same shitty neighbours. Nothing's changed for us. And so your grants, your payments, your stipend that you've given us to lift us out of poverty, it's gone nowhere because the cost of living's gone through the roof. And so you're gaslighting us into thinking that we should be grateful, and we don't. We hate your guts.
Yeah, and deservedly so. But it does, it gets back to that early point I made. You've got to throw a heap of money at Talbot Mills to find out what people are thinking and what you should be running on. And Talbot Mills are competent; they'll be able to tell you. But you've got to do the work, and you've got to listen, and that means you need to invest. I think that it was really noticeable that David Farrar tells us that when Bill English, after he lost in 2002, National increased its research budget, and they got pretty close in 2005. But after, or when Simon Bridges was leader, the research budget fell dramatically because they didn't have as much budget, so they just cut it, and they were spending it on all sorts of other stuff. So they didn't really know what the voters were thinking. Although, in fairness, they probably did know the voters were thinking, we don't like Simon Bridges, and it wouldn't really matter what else he did. They just didn't like him. And, that's unfortunate for him, but it's part of what Labor need to look at. Who are the people, when it comes the time to replace Hipkins, who are the people that voters won't look at and immediately dismiss? They've got to test the potential leaders, and it's possible to do. Talbot Mills would be able to do it. And, one of the really, really important things is just a blink test. The time you take the blink, you make your mind up about a politician, which is why you and I will never hold elected office, Cam. No. The time that it takes people to blink, they think that guy's a bastard and I'm never going to vote for him. And, and that's just how it is. And there's nothing we can do about it. And we're realistic. But, you put up someone that fails the blink test, and they will be as successful as all of the leaders that have failed for Labor in the past. And, Jacinda was a phenomenon because she turned up with absolutely no policies that they didn't have already, though the policies were useless. Her slogan was, let's do this. I mean, what did that mean? Nothing.
What did they do?
Yeah. And yet she got about a 14-point bounce in the polls and ends up on 34% in Prime Minister. But that was because she'd done so much work in the media and was very likeable and a very pleasant, lovely person in the eyes of the public. And that's the kind of person that you need. You can't have someone that's dour or defensive, who gets angry and who can't relate to people who, I think that in the beginning, everyone seemed to think that they could probably relate to Jacinda until they worked out they didn't really agree with her. But at least they thought, oh, yeah, she's okay. I wouldn't mind having a drink with her.
So who has Labor got? I mean, if Hipkins decides, oh, this is all too hard, I'd rather go and play Happy Families with Tony, and decides to go, I'm not sure he would do that. But let's say he did. Who have Labor got in their caucus now that could fill the role of a credible leader? I mean, surely it can't be Grant Robertson. I mean, he's going to go down in history as New Zealand's worst finance minister, and given the competition from Sir Robert Muldoon, that's a tough ask. But that's where he's heading.
And Arnold Nordmeyer. But I think that the blink test with Grant Robertson is he looks like a cardi wearing civil servant off the set of Gliding On, and I'm sure you'll be able to share the photo of Jim of Gliding On, and he's a dead ringer for Grant Robertson. He's not a vote winner. What I would suggest is, I think that everyone listening to this needs to go and have a look at our team page on the Labor website and look at the people that the caucus members and look at them in the time it takes you to blink, make your mind up about whether you like them or not. And, there are a few there that look the part and probably could be quite competent, but,
well, it's not Megan Woods, is it?
No. She's just, she's like you and I. She just isn't
she's just
someone that's going to pass the blink test.
It's not going to be Carmel Cepoloni either. I mean, she doesn't look anything like her photo for a start.
Yeah. Look, I think that, but let other people make their judgment, because my judgment is that I quite like the look of Camilla Belic, and I think that the bloke from Palmerston North, who I've known people who served on council with him, said he was a really friendly, good bloke. They were National supporters. He looks the part. I'm just not sure that there's many more there that actually look the part and pass the blink test.
Yeah, Pene Henare looks the part. He's an outlier, but the problem that these guys have got is that under Ardern's leadership, the ministers don't appear to have actually done very much, despite the large pay packets and all the perks that go with being a minister. If you look through press releases, very few of them did anything. There was about 5 members of cabinet that actually did all the heavy lifting. They were Chris Hipkins, Grant Robertson, Jacinda Ardern to a certain extent, and David Parker. And that's about it. Then they brought in, of course, Megan Woods, who was the campaign chair, and she probably thinks she did a great job getting the number that they got. But everybody else seems to be decidedly ordinary. I can't see a leader coming through there. It's just almost impossible to.
I can see a leader. I think that it's not that hard to imagine someone actually being competent. I mean, I'm sure if in 1993 we would have been saying the same thing about Helen Clark and feeling vindicated when her preferred prime minister number was 2 and she had Labor at 14%. She's the greatest politician of our lifetime.
She just had raw political talent though, and a bloody mindedness as well, which is admirable in some politicians.
They could copy what Helen does, and they could work closely with her in the Helen Clark Foundation to develop the policy and the campaign plans, and outsource some of the thinking to that organisation, as happens in just about every other country in the world. Someone we haven't mentioned is Serena Williams. I mean, she was young, has potential because she's in a safe red seat. But, one of the tragedies for Labor was that they ended up with a whole lot of useless old people and not much new blood. So I think they had 2 new MPs. And so there wasn't any real new blood. And then all the list MPs coming in next on the list are basically failed members of the previous administration that don't have that much potential. So I'm not entirely pessimistic. I think they have some options, but they're going to need to work as hard as Helen Clark did and build the team that she did and do the grunt work that her team did to put her in a position to win.
Yeah, they've only got 7 list MPs.
And there's no new ones. They'll all be retreads if they come back. Willow Jean Prime,
Aisha Verrill, Willie Jackson.
I mean the ones outside of Parliament, the list of Labor, the ones that will come in if someone resigns.
Yeah, but they need someone like they need David Parker and Kelvin Davis and all these other dead shits really to quit and go to revitalise. But it's encouraging them to do that. But that's the problem with trophers who have been there forever. They don't like to have to go and find a new trough to sup at.
Yeah, and they're scarcely going to get much support from the current government because they spent so much time alienating, especially ACT and New Zealand First. So I think they probably have a bit of a fatwa against former Labor people getting government appointments too.
Unless you just want to be, spiteful and give them a government job so that it takes them out of the Labor Party and shuts them up. But I just don't think they've got enough grunt there. I don't think there's anybody there who has the capability of making a huge difference to the fortunes of the Labor Party, unfortunately. And maybe they're going to have several iterations of leadership in the next few years.
Yeah, I think that's a fair call. I think that were I running Labor's strategy and only getting paid to win, I'd still back myself to be able to nail National. But there'd have to be some quite tough conversations inside the Labor caucus about the need to win rather than the need to virtue signal. And I'm not sure how that would go. They seem to be very virtuous and not very results orientated.
And that's the biggest problem for them is we tend to look at strategies. Labor tends to look at tactics. Of course, tactics being shorter term to but they don't have this overarching strategy. And I think they thought after they got 50% of the vote under Jacinda Ardern in 2020 that they could go another 2 terms before their support diminished to such an extent to let National come in through the back door. But they lost 50% of their vote in 3 years.
Yeah, they and they're not alone in that. There's plenty of other people that did well in the immediate COVID election and now are extremely unpopular. But, your point about tactics, not strategy, I think that they're probably going to think that Parliament matters. And basically, Parliament doesn't matter that much. It's not going to change many people's minds. The parliamentary press gallery gets smaller and smaller all the time because with the number of click-throughs being counted now, the media organisations know that no one really follows what goes on in politics.
That's because they tell lies.
They shouldn't. Well, yeah, but at the same time, I think it's more because no one's interested. It's not very interesting politics. We may care about it, but most voters don't. And they sort of emerge near election time and have a look around and think, well, those bastards were useless, or, John Key hasn't done too badly, we'll give him another crack. But, in Parliament itself, it's important that they don't adopt the Simon Bridges strategy of asking questions of the Prime Minister all the time, and he just soundly got beaten and got nowhere. It's got to be a question time Serengeti strategy. You've got to feast on the weak. You go after the ones that are unethical, incompetent, and you put pressure on those ones. And unless you've got an opportunity to land a real blow on Luxon or Peters or Seymour, you stick to feasting on the weak. And if that means that the Prime Minister is not really getting too many questions, so be it. I mean, last time we talked, you mentioned the great job Lockwood Smith did with Tato Phillip-Field and how Helen Clark had to sit there watching one of her ministers basically getting rinsed, and there was nothing she could do. And, that would have frustrated the hell out of her, and it will frustrate Luxon if that happens to him. But it just made the point that Labor went competent, and she didn't sack him quick enough. And, it was a wound that National exposed and Lockwood exposed over that long period of time that really made people think, it's time to move on from Helen Clark and Labor. They're just not, they've lost their touch. And, ethics and competence is always where, Newt Gingrich was the one that has probably done it best, where he just spent 4 years hammering his opponents on ethics until they actually got done for ethics because they were unethical. And, obviously you and I have nailed a few people for being quite unethical, and quite a few of them, no one actually knows that we're involved in getting rid of them. But at the same time, that's an opportunity for Labor to exploit, because there will be people in National that do stupid things that require them to be removed from Parliament.
Yeah, that's the funny thing too about Parliament is the general public don't really care about what goes on in there. But it is important for morale amongst your own team. And, and here's a classic case, right? On Tuesday, during question time, Rawiri Waititi got up and started speaking in Maori, 100% in Maori, and asking questions of Winston Peters, who then stood up and said that Waititi speaking Maori is ignoring all the English-speaking people who are watching the broadcast, so I'm not going to answer any questions that are asked in Maori.
and I think that probably appealed to both New Zealand First voters and Maori Party voters, and I think that's one of the big risks for Labor this term is that the Maori Party and New Zealand First are going to spend 3 years fighting each other because strategically it makes a lot of sense for them to fight each other, and Labor will get drawn on the Maori Party side rather than just letting them have that ground and trying to win over the middle voter. They'll be backing up and trying to out Maori the Maori Party.
I mean, and the hilarious thing is too about Winston being back in Parliament, and Labor must be sitting there cringing, because they know if they go after Winston, if they ask him any questions, he's just going to come back and throw all the dirt that he's undoubtedly got all over them and splatter them from breakfast time to dinner time.
Oh, and with a big smile, and there'll be a whole lot of people that don't like Labor just cheering Winston on, as they've been cheering Winston and Shane on for fighting the Maori Party in the media.
I tell you what I've really enjoyed since the election is watching dyed-in-the-wool blinkered National Party people who are always never Winston, he's corrupt, he's this, he's that. They've got all sorts of stuff, every reason in the sun to not vote for Winston Peters or support Winston Peters, and now having to actually like what he's saying and doing in Parliament because he's on their team.
Yeah, well, I think some of them have probably realised that Winston might reflect some of their views a little bit more than National too. I think that's something that perhaps hasn't been discussed enough from National's perspective. Some of Winston's views on nationhood are probably closer to what the median National voter are than the very free market liberal approach, especially to immigration, that National is taking. But we're not really here to talk about National. I mean, maybe we'll do that in the new year. But, the thing here with Labor, the next major tactical thing that they probably should be doing is firing up for the 2025 local body elections and getting their people running good campaigns, building their profile, getting elected, having a reason to be in the media constantly, reminding people of that there are good people in the Labor Party, that there are some, and they are electable. And if they push all their candidates to run for local government, the dodgy ones will get found out. I mean, you and I have found out quite a lot of dodgy local government candidates when we used to run New Zealand's dodgiest local government candidate award. But anyway, that would be the real. I would be going out to all the people that want to be Labor MPs saying, you prove yourself at local government level, you get yourself elected, you build your campaign team, you learn how to get out there and campaign. And that'll help you, because National have won a whole lot of seats that they weren't expecting to win, and those seats will be won back by Labor. But they've got to win some of the seats that are no longer marginal, like Tuki with a majority of over 10,000 that they lost. And that's not going to happen without someone that is pretty competent and they can't turn up 3 months before the election and run a campaign with any expectation of winning. And while people might go on about, it's the party vote that counts, in my view, the single best way of raising the party vote in a seat is to have a really good candidate running a good campaign. And that's why local government matters. You need to lift your party vote by having good people running good campaigns right across the country. You can't have too many donkeys running in seats that Labor need to be picking up votes. And really, even a seat like Whangaparao, where National weighs its vote and its majority, you've still got to have someone competent, because a few hundred votes might be the difference between an extra seat or not an extra seat. And in a tight election, that those few hundred votes in Whangaparao could make the difference between a Labor and National government.
Well, that's the thing, that I guess that's why the National Party keeps standing candidates in the Maori seats, although I can't actually work out why. But there are a couple of hundred votes for them in each of those elections.
Yeah. It's MMP in a really tight election. It could be the difference between being in government and being in opposition. So, get good people in every seat you can, and get them all running good campaigns, and that will lift your party vote. You probably also got to go and have a bit of a quiet word to a few of the people that have just been around a bit too long and are useless to begin with, and move them on. I mean, Phil Twyford, Jesus, why didn't they get rid of him? I mean, that bloke's just useless. And, Helen White managed to almost lose the safest Labor seat in the country.
To Melissa Lee.
Comprehensively bad. Yeah, and Melissa may be a competent minister, and she was competent in Parliament, but she's never been a vote winner, and she almost wins. It's just absolutely biggest belief that a seat that has had the three of the last 6 Labor leaders owning that seat, and they've got someone that can't even really beat Melissa Lee by 10,000 votes. It's beat it by under 100 or something.
I mean, Helen Clark and Jacinda Ardern were both prime ministers. I'm sure they've got a third prime minister in Mount Talbot.
Yeah. Well, might be a Green Prime Minister in Mount Albert if they keep Helen White in there.
If she's there, then that's a very good chance of that. I mean, you're right. They had David Shearer represented Mount Albert, of course, after Helen Clark, and also Michael Joseph Savage. He represented Auckland West, of which Mount Albert was part of. So Warren Freer, again, another Labour leader in there. So Mount Albert's the hothouse, I guess, for Labour leadership, and Helen White just nearly lost it.
Yeah, and she was never very impressive in Auckland Central either.
No. So what does Labour need to do? They need to be honest with themselves, don't they, about why they lost. And that's the problem politicians have generally. It doesn't matter what party, they're often never honest with themselves after a loss.
Well, absolutely. And the honesty needs to really start with two things. The first one is admitting the voters weren't wrong. And the second thing is getting the largest amount of cash possible and taking it to Talbot Mills and say, you've got to do the deep-seated research we know you're capable of because you do it for Australian parties. And you've got to tell us the positions that will put us in play again. We want to be in play and we've got to do this professionally. So how much cash do you need and when can we have the results and what's it going to cost over 3 years so we get our strategy right? Otherwise, it's just a random group, or not a random group, a group of essentially failed politicians standing around arguing about opinions rather than having any hard data.
Just on Talbot Mills, last week they released a poll that showed that prescription fees being free was very, very popular, even with National Party voters. And I would have thought releasing that poll before the election might have been more beneficial than after the election when we all knew that National was going to change that. That was a stated policy. They refused to buckle despite media pressure, despite political pressure. It makes me think that the Labour Party aren't actually directing Talbot Mills to go looking at sensible things. They're actually telling them to go and look after things that the battle was lost at the election. And again, it's fighting those things, those virtue signalling things that they're fighting and not things that voters care about.
Fighting the last war. You go to Talbot Mills and say, come on, guys, you're the experts. You tell us what you recommend that we pay you to do, not us telling you what to do, because that won't work. When we talk to Farah, it's always, well, Farah, you tell us where we're wrong, not, oh, we think this, Farah, and you get your polls to tell us that we're right, because we're just not. His polls are right, we're not, unless we actually get our opinions congruent with what his polls are. And that's the bit that I think that Labor probably lacked the professionalism to get Talbot Mills to do the real work that's required.
Yeah, they probably are sitting there thinking, oh, we need to ask this question because if we ask it that way, we'll get an answer we don't like. What you actually need to be doing as a pragmatic politician and political leader is to actually find out exactly what it is that the voters don't like about you guys. And it's unpalatable to hear the criticism, but it's vitally important if you want to change and to change that the perception that people have of you.
Very basic politics, just very basic, that you've got to go and get your polling company to give you the answers. You don't go and tell them what the answers are or what the questions are. I spent quite a lot of time arguing with people that wanted rid of the last government and were commissioning polling. They said, oh, well, you want the question asked this way. Well, why? Why? Do you want to just have your beliefs reinforced, or do you want to know what the voters think?
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. And whenever I've wanted to do polls, I've always said to David Farrell, you write the question, right? Because he's a professional pollster. He's going to write a question that is going to get us to the truth of the matter rather than, as you say, reinforce your own particular view or agenda or whatever it is you're pushing.
It just reminds me to ask you when you're getting Matt King back on. I mean, he didn't agree with the polls, but the polls turned out to be, they may not have been perfect, but they showed he had no chance, and he had no chance. Election night proved it.
Well, the poll that Reality Check Radio ran for Northland showed that he'd come fourth, and that's where he came.
Yeah.
Right.
And, he objected to the way the question was asked. And so he had another poll, and it basically took him up a little bit, but it didn't change the result. And, just a classic example of, I don't like the question, rather than, well, what does the poller actually say my chances are?
Well, there were four polls in Northland, and they all showed the same thing. And yet he went out to all his supporters saying, no, I'm seeing people on the street that are saying to me, go, Matt, go. Well, Morris Williamson's got great anecdotal evidence of that, where, he gets these new candidates who say, I'm going great guns. Everyone says they're voting for me. He says, of course they are. No, New Zealanders are polite. They'll lie to you because they don't want to hurt your feelings. And that's where polling allows you to find out what the truth is without getting your feelings hurt.
Yeah. And, if you're professional, your feelings aren't going to be hurt. You're going to take it as a data point, and you're going to try and modify something to change it, not complain about the number itself.
Just to sum up then, what Labor needs to do is acknowledge that they lost, that the voters got it right for the voters, and then they need to embark on a strategy that basically involves them shutting up for the next at least 6 months, doing huge amounts of research, and then coming back with policies and outlines and a direction of travel that will give them a pathway to getting that majority.
Yeah, and I think that the thing that inevitably the pathway will include is going to be working with the Maori Party and the Greens. So work out whether you want to spend your time fighting for those with those parties for voters, or you want to try and take votes off the three parties in government, which gives you a better chance of winning than if you go after the centre left vote already and try and increase your vote that way. It won't get you any closer to being in government if all you do is take votes from the Maori Party and the Greens. You've got to take them off the three parties in government.
It's the same situation that National found itself in. They were watching a resurgent ACT party taking their votes because ACT was never going to take them off the Labor Party. And National was sitting there trying to work out how to shore up their support and completely ignoring New Zealand First, who were sitting there cannibalising votes off people who were dissatisfied with National, Labor and ACT. And then they had these grand assumptions that it was just going to be a National and ACT government and that they'd have a two-party coalition. That was it. And election night, I was sitting there watching Winston laughing at the results coming in and saying, it's not over yet. It's not over yet. And he said, we've got to wait till the fat lady sings. And I said, I don't think Megan Woods has got her vocal cords tuned up yet, just quite yet, Winston. He said, "I'm not talking. He said, "I'm not talking about her. I'm talking about we've got to wait till the final count comes in, then we'll see where we're at." And he was dead right. Absolutely dead right.
Yeah. Yep. He certainly was.
He's a cunning old fox, and I tell you what, I'm enjoying watching him in the House. And the Labor Party needs to work out a strategy on how to rebuild those bridges to New Zealand First. Otherwise, I think they're going to find life very, very difficult being cuddled up to the Greens and the Maori Party.
No, undoubtedly. There's not 51% of the population that appears likely to vote for those three parties. So they've got to keep their options open. It depends. Do you want to be in government or not?
Well, I mean, the thing here for them is the Greens are deluded. They think that they've had their best ever result because of their grand policies and they're fabulous, not because Labor was shit. And the Maori Party is exactly the same. They think they had a grand electorate strategy and that they're going to hold these seats forever. I mean, they've said that to me privately, that they're going to hold them forever now. And again, it hasn't occurred to them that they won because the Labor candidates were shit. And and so if the Labor Party corrects that, has decent candidates, more palatable policies, then I see in the next election that the Greens and the Maori Party are going to lose support. The Labour Party is going to grow support, but there's still not enough to get to 61 amongst them at the current policy settings.
Yeah,
all they're doing is cutting the pie a different way.
That's
That's all. It's the same pie, but it's just being cut slightly differently.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Well, Simon, thank you once again for coming on and sharing your knowledge and dark arts and Machiavellian plotting.
I don't think it's really all that dark arts. It's like get a truckload of money and give it to Talbot Mills and then work out how you're going to get to 61 votes. But I think it might be a little bit more complex for the people in the Labour Party to understand that. And, I think for the viewers, they need to know that neither of us are getting a stipend from Talbot Mills. We just believe that polling matters.
Yeah, I mean, they're a good polling company. It's not our preferred polling company. If I couldn't get David Farrar to do something, I'd bring Talbot Mills second, but they're competent guys. And the guys who run that know what they're doing. And they talk sensible game, and the Labour Party really does need to listen to them. But, the Labour Party will never listen to you and I, but perhaps they should.
Well, perhaps they should listen to Talbot Mills at least.
Yeah. That'd be a good start.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyway, I better let you get back to your fishing commitments.
Yep, right.
Thank you for taking time out from your serious fishing commitments and puppy raising.
Yeah. The weather was a bit dodgy today. I've been doing a bit of work, but I'll be heading out shortly.
Yeah, there's never a day that you don't.
Yep.
All right, Thank you. Polling. That's Simon's prescription for Labour, but will they follow that advice? Time will tell. Don't forget to send comments on Simon's interview to inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
You've heard the words open, fair, both sides of the story. It's easy to say them, but practicing them often seems like a bridge too far. New Zealand, it's time for a reality check. RCR, Reality Check Radio. Rational discussion, common sense, and open debate for real. With me, Paul Brennan.
You just can't make this stuff up. You couldn't write the script.
Veteran broadcaster Peter Williams.
Where is the evidence they actually make a difference? It turns out that was a very fair question to ask.
Taking on the mainstream, Chantel Baker.
Mainstream media, as usual, in their little perch.
The man who cares so much and whose background is for real, Rodney Hyde.
The doctors don't believe them. They can't get ACC. They can't work. They're told it's all in their head.
Along with a raft of contributors to inform, entertain, and bring the truth back to New Zealand media. It's time for a reality check, all right. RCR, Reality Check Radio at www.realitycheck.radio. We've arrived.
Our text machine is now live. Send us your thoughts by texting your message to 2057. That's 2057. So get in touch with us now.
Right, now it's time for Cam's Buddies, and this week we'll find out what they think about the fiscal cliffs, or landmines as I like to call them, left by the Labour Party. My producer has them all lined up and ready to go, so let's hear what Cam's Buddies have to say about the fiscal landmines left by Labour. Good afternoon, welcome to Cam's Buddies, Paul.
Good afternoon, Cam. How are you this day?
Fantastic. Only got one more show to
That's the story.
So we're going to have to hit home runs.
Oh, that's disappointing. There's only one more show so far this year. We enjoy these shows.
Yeah, it's a whole heap of fun, but it's all right. I'll be back next year. So the topic this week is what Christopher Luxon calls the fiscal cliffs that he's finding as they open the books and realise that Grant Robertson appears to be an economic pygmy. What do you think about these fiscal cliffs, in particular the landmines or cliffs that they've found in the Three Waters legislation?
Well, I think lots of this is quite interesting because is it stupidity or is it deception? For example, if we were to cancel the Three Waters project, the theory is you save 300 million. But is it 300 million that they've allowed for, or is it 300 million that they were going to allow for? So, in fact, the hole's still there whether you get the saving or not. And so when a finance minister says, oh, yeah, here's what the books look like, but he hasn't actually factored in all the things that he was going to do because he's only done it on a temporary basis, I look at that and think, that doesn't seem like he's naive. It seems like he's deceptive. And I'm always concerned about such things. I mean, they do things like we haven't funded what we're going to do next with Farm Act because it's under the hospital boards as opposed to under our Farm Act provisioning or something like that. They move it around and then it's ignored in both camps. And you think, yeah, interesting.
Now, you used to sit on the board of a public company. If you booked expenditure but no revenue for that and then no ongoing expenditure for that capital expenditure, what would the Financial Markets Authority and the Stock Exchange say about that sort of behaviour?
They've been none too impressed, I can tell you, and there would be there's regulations and laws that stop you doing that, and you get to go to jail if you play hide and seek with the truth and financials of public companies. I know we had to be more open than open and more honest than honest, and it gave, in some cases, your opposition opportunity to look at what was happening, and if they wanted to pinch your staff, they knew how much the most expensive staff in your company got within certain brackets and all this sort of thing. But this is the law. And so when I see that they've done these sorts of things, like light rail, it's if they shut that project down, what do they get, 100 million or so?
Yep.
But is it being allowed for? Or is it just another, the things that we could shut down, they weren't allowing for them anyway because that's coming out of next year's funding. And so they're saying we're at this position at the moment. I think there's quite a bit of deception that's going on. And I think also some of these food programs in schools, again, in cybersecurity in schools, these are all things that are going to cost someone money at some time, but they haven't allowed it in because they just said, well, they funded it this year. They're going to relook at it and see if they want to fund it again next year. And anytime you pull the pin on some of these things, you know, there's a hue and cry like we've never heard before. But I guess the benefit that they've got is the number of billions that were spent in the last half a dozen budgets that they did. I think there's got to be some things there that you can take away. I think they spent an additional spending of over 50 billion in their 6 budgets. So I think there must be ways to get, 3, 4, 5 billion out of that by shutting some of those projects down because they're not necessarily necessary.
Well, I reckon that we know a guy that we go fishing with who's a ninja with spreadsheets. I reckon the government should hire him, pay him $500,000 a year, and let him go at it at the government accounts and find all the holes that could be filled or carved out. I'm pretty sure he'd be able to find several $1 billion that could be saved.
Exactly. It's a bit like that when the president on some movie was looking like he was going to pass, so they put some other bloke in place and he got his mate from down the corner who was an accountant to have a look at it, and he came up with a number of ways to save money. If you just get Joe Scissor in the street, that's an accountant, who just from nowhere in particular, they would look at this and say, this is ridiculous in a number of areas. In fact, with the limited knowledge I have of different finances that I've looked through different companies, I could give them some good places to start.
Yeah, I mean, the Three Waters one is astonishing. They hired, something like 400 people, put them on 5-year contracts at the time when it looked like the Labour Party was going to lose the election anyway. And, I'm heading towards this is mischief because I think the Labour Party assumed the National Party wouldn't do anything because it'd be too hard to unravel it. But they seem to have grasped the nettle and want to actually start unravelling this. And so all of these little landmines and traps and cliffs that are out there need to be faced. But the problem with landmines is if you leave them in place, well, they tend to blow up sometime down the future.
Exactly. And if you set people up on 5-year contracts when you've only got a 3-year term, I think there's a degree that you could call those folk back and say that was outside your delegated financial authority to do that. Unless you've got a consensus over a multiple, like over all the government options. So in other words, if the people from each of the parties say, yes, we can all agree bipartisan, that will work, then you can sign up such things on 5-year contracts. But if you've got something where one part of the government is saying, or the opposition is saying, we don't like that and we won't do that and we won't be continuing it, and then you sign the folk up on 5-year contracts, it's like, should they be signing the charter schools up on 20-year contracts so that they can make sure that they get some longevity? Because last time people invested in the education and were doing a fantastic job with many of these students, then Labor came and said, because the teachers' union doesn't like the way you've authorised different teachers, doesn't matter that they're doing a good job, we better get rid of them all, even though the poorest in our communities were doing the best in such schools. No, we can't have that, so they shut it down. Well, who wants to be a charter school operator and try round 2 if you can't get a long contract? And because Labor have proved that they can give a 5-year contract when the opposition is saying we don't want to do that, and it's really a 3-year maximum contract they should have and only one left, or a 1 + 3, if giving a contract out in the last year of their term, I do think it's very mischievous.
Yeah, by design, I think. It's completely dishonest, though, of the Labor Party. They were gaslighting everybody, telling us that they were good economic stewards. They were poo-pooing anything that Nicola Willis said. They especially deride anything that David Seymour says. Turns out that Nicola Willis and David Seymour were bang on the money, that there was these massive holes that needed to be filled. I think we're staring down the barrel of Grant Robertson taking over from Robert Muldoon as the worst finance minister we've ever seen.
Well, it's looking very much that way. And even then, Muldoon put in place some quite lead-ups to the Think Big projects that are still infrastructure things that are done today. What Labor's done in the last 6 years is just spend money so that people are all happy, not on things that count, not on infrastructure. They've made our roads, with the help of our councils and stupidity, narrower, nowhere to park, and nothing to see when you get there. They've made every road a choke point. I hear just on the way home today, it takes an hour and 20 minutes to get from the city to Drury, which at a good time you can do in 25 minutes.
Yeah, I mean...
all these sorts of things.
I mean, that's a bugbear that I've got, having lived on the North Shore for quite some time. They spent 7 years, millions of dollars on 3 kilometres of road, if that, making it 5 lanes either side. But at either end of it, it's 2 lanes either side. So you've got 3 kilometres of smooth-flowing traffic that comes grinding to a standstill at the end of it. And it doesn't seem that there's any joined-up thinking in any of these infrastructure projects. And there's certainly not any joined-up thinking with the finance minister we've had for the last 6 years.
Exactly. I've just had my sister over from Australia, and she was saying, I can't believe how many road cones there are. There's just road cones everywhere.
Did you tell her there were more?
New Zealand road cones.
Did you tell her there was plenty more where they came from?
Maybe we should be selling those to try and help for the fiscal debt that we're likely to be finding ourselves in. We could probably sell road cones to help.
Maybe we should put the road cones in the potholes.
As you say.
Yeah. All right, Paul, thank you very much for your thoughts on that, and we'll talk next week for the last show.
Okay, take care.
Good afternoon, Jack. Welcome to Cam's Buddies.
Hello, Cam.
I always resist the temptation to say hi, Jack, because that'd be funny. But you've probably heard that a million times.
And more.
Not on an aeroplane, though. I'd never do it on an aeroplane.
No, you wouldn't. Not these days.
This week's topic, Jack, is the landmines, as I call them, or fiscal cliffs, as Christopher Luxon calls them, that they're discovering in the government's books. Standout things are Treasury identified a whole lot of infrastructure projects where there was capital expenditure booked, but no ability in the workforce to deliver it. There, of course, is Three Waters, where they've signed up staff members on 5-year contracts when it was apparent that the government was going to lose office. And there's many more happening on a daily basis. We've got unfunded Pharmac stuff going on. What are your thoughts on these?
Well, it's the same old story. When the government changes, the incoming blames the outgoing for everything. And we knew it was going to happen. Now it's happened. I'll just wait for it to blow over. Some of those things didn't need to have any ongoing funding because it may not have been required. But really, it's just a standard sort of response that every new government makes when they come in. So I don't think too much about it at all. I think let it all wash out and let's see what happens.
Yeah, some of these things catch you up later. Like, I mean, Auckland Council's got some classic examples like the Central Rail Loop, which the government funded 50%, but what they didn't fund and aren't going to fund and will fight funding is the ongoing maintenance costs and annual costs to keep it running, which is eye-wateringly expensive. Something like $220 million a year needs to be found by Auckland ratepayers. And there's only a projected, which means it'll probably be half that, but a projected income stream of just 30 million.
Yeah, and Auckland Council don't need any more problems like that. I'm just glad I'm not running it.
Yeah. You've got these ridiculous situations where, with the Three Waters legislation, they were funding the Commerce Commission to conduct oversight of the setup of it, but they only gave them 1 year's worth of funding. And it's going to run out in, I think it's in April. It runs out, the funding for that. Nationals, of course, repealing Three Waters, putting in place their own strategy, but it's going to require funding from the Commerce Commission to actually oversee those anyway. But this is the sort of stuff that Labor left unfunded at all.
Some time ago, I said to my brother-in-law, who's the CEO of Watercare, hey, this is a wasted exercise. It's not going to happen. I can't even remember his response, but I'll be catching up with him soon, on Christmas Day, in fact. So that'll be interesting. Find out what the hell's going on.
You don't mention my name to him.
Why not? I mention your name to everyone.
You'll get a stone cold silence coming out of his.
Do I?
Yeah, well,
do I care? Do I look like I care?
No, you don't. That's precisely why you're a mate of mine, because you don't care.
I treat everyone on face value, whoever they are.
Yeah, and then what comes out of their mouth, if it's sensible or not.
Yeah, exactly.
Unfortunately,
I don't know what other people say about those people.
No, that's right. You're your own man, and so am I. But anyway, pass on my kind regards to him, then see what happens.
Look, let's just wait and see what happens. There's all this stuff about we borrowed too much. Borrowing's good. I love borrowing. I've had my company 50 years, and I've been in debt the whole time. I borrow everything, just the way I operate. But lending money is just a business. So you got to keep those people in business. How do the Jews make money?
Well, the thing
they lend it out.
Yeah, the thing is, though, Jack, is there's good debt and there's bad debt. And, the previous government spent eye-watering sums of money on borrowing billions upon billions of dollars, which they then effectively threw into a fan outside of a window and blew it out into the economy, of which we have nothing to show for it. We haven't got any infrastructure projects that are completed. We haven't got any fixes in things that are seriously in need of repair, including the health system. We didn't get anything for it.
Look, the last people that ever made any infrastructure sort of things work were Muldoon and Bill Birch. And everyone sort of thinks of Muldoon as some sort of crackpot that ruined the economy. He was the best one. We haven't had anything since.
Well, I like pointing out to people who drive EVs that all their power comes from the Think Big projects that they all opposed.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And, Manapuri Power Project, which I know intimately, having worked on it, when the people of New Zealand decided not to finish the project, in other words, raise the lake to the intended level so we could get full power, look at the all that work, all that money that went in there, and only half the power was produced. We could change that now by raising the lake. It's one of my pet hobby horses. And I know, yes, it's a long way down there, and to get it up, there'd be losses, but it'd still be an easy thing to do and a very cheap fix, relatively speaking, to get more power.
Well, and the trouble with the power is it's at the wrong end of the country.
Yes, that's what I just said. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we make all this power in the South Island, but it's all needed in the North Island. We need to perhaps have some power solutions that aren't reliant on wind or sun in the North Island. Maybe we could put a...
And was it you that was saying the cost of putting another line across the Cook Strait, the price was astronomical? Was it you that said that the other day?
Yeah, absolutely. It's billions of dollars to put a new cable across.
Yeah, so maybe my idea is not a good idea, whatever.
Well, it might be a good idea if people wanted to live in the South Island a bit more. Maybe we could send some of the rat bags in Auckland down there.
What do you mean? Are you talking about me?
Oh, definitely not. Can't have you in the South Island. Mind you, you can always fly up. You can always fly up for lunch on Monday.
Hey, look at the weather in around Wellington at the moment. You wouldn't want to be flying through that, would you?
No. The best seat in Wellington is the seat on the 737 just after they close the door and push back.
Yes, that's dead right.
It's a horrid place.
There's only Qantas flying 737s out of there now, but that's good.
Oh, that's right. They're all Airbuses, aren't they? Sorry, I'm arguing with a airline expert.
Yes, you're saying everyone should be going to Australia.
Yeah, dead right. That'd be a good start. Get all the civil servants living in Australia.
Oh, that would be good, wouldn't it?
It would.
Don't get me started on that.
Well, my solution is to move them to Waiouru. Just build some, Russian-style utilitarian bunkers for accommodation and set up all the civil servants living in Waiouru.
Well, you wouldn't need to do that, Cam. Just hire some of the army barracks there. If you've been down there, you have. You actually lived down there, didn't you?
I did.
My goodness. Yeah. Crikey. That deserves some respect. That's the coldest place ever.
Yeah, it's
horrible.
It is a horrible place. But we had heaps of fun blowing things up. So anyway, it was all good and
of course.
fun and games.
A man out here.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Jack, thank you for your comments, and we'll talk again next week for the last show of the year.
Sorry, I was useless tonight. I'm so sorry.
Oh, well, you'll have a fan out there that'll say you were wonderful, I bet you. It might be your brother. It's not likely to be your brother, though, is it?
No.
All right, Jack, thanks for your call. Welcome to Cam's Buddies. Jimmy?
G'day, Cam. How are you today?
Yeah, good, mate. So the topic this week is these fiscal cliffs that Christopher Luxon and Nicola Willis describe. I prefer to call them fiscal landmines, but we've got all of this unfunded, uncosted spending by the previous government, like things on Three Waters, like 5-year contracts for staff. You've got the Farm Act funding that isn't being funded, a whole lot of other things like that. What are your thoughts on those?
Well, is anyone surprised?
No.
I mean, this was to be expected. I mean, there'll be loads more for another 12 months of all this unexpected stuff. The government we just got rid of was so unbelievably fiscally reckless that it's just not a surprise. And things are going to have to get real tight to pay for all this. So it's going to be a difficult year. And I guess Nicola's going to do a mini budget before Christmas. So we're going to see some of the damage that's going to be caused in National's plans. You know, they're going to have to probably cut back some of their plans, pay for it all. It's not a surprise whatsoever.
I think they're going to have to take an axe to all the spending. I mean, there was billions upon billions of dollars spent, but we haven't got anything for it. We need to cut that as quickly as possible.
Yeah, well, you just can't spend like that. It's insane. It's why we have so much inflation and high interest rates, and it's really hurting people.
Yeah.
But there was things that government did when they knew they were going, like buying the factory in Kingsland for the light rail. You know, they knew that was going to be cancelled, and they still went ahead with the purchase. I mean, it's just completely morally reckless. It's horrendous. It's amazing they can't be held to account for it.
Well, that's the problem. That's the problem with politicians is, you know, we've got laws that are in place like the Fiscal Responsibility Act, but there doesn't appear to be any penalties for breaching the act. You know, I earlier to Paul, and he was saying this looks like mischief rather than mistake.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, if a CEO acted in this way, they could be quite easily charged with financial crimes, or, misleading. It's horrendous what's happened. And the fact that Grant Robertson still sits in Parliament questioning and laughing and mocking the new government is just mind-boggling, actually. More stuff's going to come. Like, there's been way more spending in other areas. Like, I know that New Zealand Housing Agency has got spent billions.
Oh, there'll be heaps of bombs out there, won't there? They're like IEDs that terrorists use, and they just sit there lurking, waiting for a small child to pick them up, or in this case, Nicola Willis.
Well, the government's just going to inherit them all over the show. It's going to make it really hard to govern, because they'll say one thing and they'll discover some more thing, and they'll just keep destroying their budgets all over the show, and it'll be hard to deliver what they promise, and then the media will attack them for it. So. But I am quite pleased with how the new government's going. I see this week that they canned the speed 80 lower speed limits across the country, just wiped the whole thing. Fantastic.
Yeah.
That's the road to zero Goldberger.
I mean, that was ridiculous anyway, and you're never going to have a zero road toll. I mean, you just it's just fanciful nonsense to even come up with that. I mean, the only thing that zero represented was the political future of Michael Wood.
Yeah, but that particular policy shows the stupidity of the government and their inability to weigh up other things. To get to zero road toll, you'd have to massively sacrifice productivity for, have cars going at 10 kilometres an hour or whatever. So people will suffer in other ways. It's unmeasurable. Whereas all they're focused on is this big zero dumbass picture, and it just makes no sense. They're not prepared to have a proper discussion around the trade-off versus policy outcome of particular policies, We saw it right through that whole government, particularly around COVID, say, just lockdowns.
It's also really bad in local government. I mean, I was talking earlier on the show to Daniel Newman, and he was aghast at the ongoing costs of the Central Rail Loop, which is something like $220 million a year. And the revenue potential is only about 30 million. I mean, which morons voted for that? And can we hunt them down and put them to work trying to pay that off?
But how does a train going round and round in a loop cost $270 million per annum?
There's no business case. There's no business case for that. It was like the business case for the bike bridge. There was no business case for that. There's no business case for light rail to the airport. Thank God that's been cancelled. I mean, there's several $1 billion there that's been cancelled, even though we've spent tens of millions of dollars on feasibility studies and other nonsense.
I know, I just can't. But what's interesting to me is that they couldn't get that across the line, even though they had a majority. Why didn't they just start, order some diggers there and start? Like, they're so literally incompetent that they couldn't even start a project where they had the full majority. They couldn't even get their own business cases past themselves.
Well, that's the problem. That's the problem with socialists, right? They believe in a command and control economy, and they think if they issue commands and control the economy, then magical things will happen.
Stuff will happen.
It's like Phil Twyford saying we're going to build 100,000 new homes. Well, they didn't even get to 3,000. They had 6 years, and they didn't even get to 3,000.
Well, Phil Twyford had a blinder through that 6 years. He started off at number 3 or 4. Now he's number 50, and he only just saved his seat by 120 votes.
Yeah. I mean, the guy's a functional idiot, really.
Yeah, barely functional. I mean, he's just completely inept, and he was ahead of Kiwi Build.
Yeah.
And it was no wonder it was a complete and utter failure.
I mean, there's some great videos of him, bloviating about how fantastic this Kiwi Build is, and you've just got to do it. It's the right thing to do, and da-da-da. He goes on and on and on. Someone should resurrect all of those videos, put them all together into a classic hits of Phil Twyford or classic hits of Grant Robertson, classic hits of Chris Hipkins, and play it back to these fools.
Well, the problem with politicians, they just don't seem to care about that, eh? They don't have any much accountability. They just laugh and say, oh, things have changed and move on.
Yeah.
I mean, most politicians in Parliament would have said things 5-10 years ago that they don't agree with now, and just they don't seem to have much principles.
They don't have any principles.
They're not principled like you, mate. They don't stick to the same beliefs over years and years.
Well, if evidence comes up to suggest that I might have been wrong, in the unlikely event that I was wrong, then I'd change my opinion. But I'm not often wrong.
Oh, geez, here we go. Anyway, but this new government's term has started well. I mean, it really is. Like, sticking to the principles is so unlike any politics I've seen in my lifetime, well, that I can remember.
I just loved watching Parliament on Tuesday when Rawiri Waititi bangs on in Maori and Winston Peters refused to answer the question. He says it's an insult to everybody else who doesn't speak Maori, so I'm not going to answer it, and sat down. I mean, everybody will be going, that's why we voted for you, Winston. That's exactly what we want you to do.
Well, I see that there was a poll out on Tuesday and Winston's gone up.
Yeah.
We knew he'd go for the polls.
But why is anyone surprised about that? He's bashed them. Funny thing was, is little Thomas Coughlin, who wrote the article, has a little snide comment at the end of the article saying, the poll was taken during the first week of the new government and Winston Peters attacked the media. Hello, Thomas. He went up in the polls. You all whined and moaned and complained and said that he was wrong and it wasn't true and we're not biased and we're not bribed and we're not bent. And everyone else said, yeah, we like what Winston says.
Well, that's the thing. Like, he's gone from 6 to 8% in
in a month,
6 weeks, whatever it is.
In a month,
yeah, and he's going to read that. He's wise enough to go, well, I'm just going to keep doing this. So you're not going to see him stop. Didn't he insult Marama Davidson on Tuesday in the House as well?
Yep. Gave her, I think he called her something about a woke lefty shill.
And that's enhanced it, eh?
Yep. It sure is. And I think Jerry Brownlee pulled him up and said, you realise, of course, to the members that what you say here is recorded in Hansard. And I think Winston Peters just said, you bet it is.
He's probably already jumped up another point, Cam.
Probably.
From Tuesday's performance.
Look, I'll tell you what, if the Maori Party and New Zealand First spend the next 3 years fighting, it can only be good for both of them.
Well, I did see the Māori Party had gone up in that poll as well.
Yeah, well, the thing is, they're fighting, doing their stuff. That stops Labour winning those seats back again. And and New Zealand First opposes it, and they go up, and so they look like they're going to, if they keep going up and they keep on hitting home runs like they are, then they could be increased in the next election. It'd be hilarious.
It is good to see not just two massive parties dominating. I mean, they're still massive compared with the rest, but it would be nice to get to the point where it wasn't just either Labour or National. It could be a combo.
If you remember rightly, on One Buddy's thing a few months ago, and I asked, what's your ideal party, structure? And I said what mine was. Mine was that we had a three-way coalition with National, ACT, and New Zealand First, with ACT and New Zealand First on about the same amount.
Well, you're there.
Pretty much came true, didn't it?
Oh, well, you must be happy, mate. You must be enjoying life, reading the woke left howling on Twitter and loving it.
Yeah, I'm loving watching them all, especially Simon Wilson. He writes an article, the National Party's wrong.
I read it on Tuesdays.
Yeah, whatever, Simon, go back to cycling. Maybe your lycra's pinching you. He just seems to be a grumpy old communist.
I like reading Russell Brown's tweets. He can't get more outraged.
He was strangely silent for 6 years, though.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's one thing you can't say about me is that I haven't been silent with parties that are, theoretically I'm on side with. I kick them just as hard as I would other parties.
No, I always liked that approach of your political writing, Cam, was that you bash both sides. And that's the way we all should be. We should need to lose the partisanness. If your team's been crappy, you need to abuse them. If they're doing good things, you need to applaud them on both sides. Because all politicians are terrible. they're mostly in it for themselves.
Well, people used to say to me, Cam, you're attacking the National Party, you need to dial it back and do the right thing. And I'd say, oh, no, I want them to be better. That's why I'm criticising them. I want them to be better. And it's the same reason why I criticise the Labour Party, or I want them to all be better. Try harder.
Yeah, and I think generally people are aiming for we're all aiming for the same thing in the end, less human suffering, more, better outcomes for people. It's just the pathway to get there we fight over.
Yeah.
So we really, all of us should bash both sides. Metaphorically, bash both sides.
Yeah, they need a good
hiding. A lot
better
off.
All right, Jimmy,
anyway,
thanks for your thoughts this week. And next week's the last week of the crunch for this year, but we'll be back next year. But I'll pull you up next week as well.
Thanks, mate.
No worries, thanks. Welcome to Cam's Buddies, Marcus. How was the sailing trip on the weekend?
It was fairly sprightly on Sunday on the way back, and beating into wind all the way. We got shook up a little bit, but it was awesome. We had a great time. Went over to Waiheke and hung out there and drank a bit of whiskey and smoked a few cigars. Should have been there, mate.
Yeah, I should have. I was a bit busy on the weekend. Well, talking about beating into the wind, it seems the government is discovering all sorts of fiscal cliffs and landmines and all these sorts of things. The great financial genius of Grant Robertson is being exposed on a daily basis. What are your thoughts on those?
Well, I mean, they're a bit silly if they're surprised by it, to be fair. I knew that all the promises they were making couldn't be funded. I mean, from what I understand, the majority of it is basically just short funding. They haven't promised it all the way out. So they're going to pay for a certain policy for a period of time. I mean, then after that, who knows? But they're always planning on running them all the way through, so they're always short. But I mean, hey, Labor was just planning to do what they always do, mate. Print some more money.
I think the only politician who said anything before the election about this was Winston Peters, and he kept saying in his meetings and speeches and interviews, well, we can't agree to anything until we see the books because we don't know what the state of the books is, but it appears that it's not good, and it seems that he was right on that.
Yeah, I think David Seymour was making some noises as well, and Nicola Willis was, I think, as well. But basically, Winston was obviously a bit more cagey about the whole thing, and like you said, he didn't want to do any big grandeur promises because he didn't know what the books were like. But, I mean, if anyone else did this sort of thing, it's called fraud, If you have a budget, you have to be open and honest in the budget, and that means being clear about what you're planning to spend over the next forthcoming time and not hiding it away in the pages of the budget and making it difficult for anyone to see. The whole point is it's supposed to be nice and clear so everyone knows what's going on, and the previous government just has been anything but transparent, and this is just another example of that. These guys, they're trying to be clever, and no one likes anyone that's clever, Tricky Dicky.
Yeah, or Tricky Grant, as the case may be. We got laws that were put in place in 1990 after National took over and opened the books and found there was a massive, the BNZ was tipping over. There was just a whole lot of stuff that was going on then. And
it was Bolger, wasn't it?
Yeah, and they passed the Fiscal Responsibility Act, but there's no penalties. Yep. There's no danger for a politician who cooks the books. And Grant Robertson's been cooking up a storm when it comes to the books.
Like I said, mate, it's fraud. If I ran my business that way and was trading insolvent, then I don't have the luxury of just printing more money. I have to actually answer to shareholders and the likes thereof. And at the end of it all, if you're promising the world and you have no way of paying for it, that's literally fraud by definition, And these guys should be held under law. Just because it's government, why are they not held to the same law as commercial businesses? I mean, you mentioned there the BNZ, they were bailed out way back then from my memory, and then they later sold it off. But yeah, so all of our tax money, i.e. all the small business owners and that sort of thing, all of that money went to pay off another private company, and then they sold it and basically got all that money for free. And it's just fraud. The whole thing's fraud, It's just a big Ponzi bloody scheme. It really irritates me because running my business, I have to be fiscally responsible because I've got no backstop, If I make bad decisions, then those bad decisions will come back and bite me in the ass. And cash flow is always a problem. It seems that these government types, they just don't care about cash flow. They just get more cash, just print some more. And that's why we're in the state we are in the world today, and that's a harp on about the CBDC, because these guys, Labour Party specifically, because they're all following the World Economic Forum mantra, and they all want to go to digital currency, and they want the US and the NZ dollar to crash, and all fiat money around the world to crash. And this is just a mechanism they're using to make sure that happens. And it's frustrating because little guys like us, trying to make ends meet for our families and that sort of thing, we don't have that luxury, mate. We have to abide by the rules. We have to do the right thing. Otherwise, we get hauled up before the courts and bankrupted. But no, if you're in the government, it's all good. Don't worry. Like you said, there's no penalty for these guys to be shysters and hide the books, which is exactly what Grant Robinson's done. There's no doubt about that. I mean, I think possibly there's a little bit of politicking going on with regards to National as well. Obviously, this was always going to be the line they were going to drum out afterwards because it makes them look a bit better. Yeah. They'll put in, I understand you're doing another little budget before Christmas to show the true state of the finances. But I mean, I doubt that this is such a surprise for Nicola Willis. I'm pretty certain she knew all about this, but she's playing the politics, and this is the way to do it. Anyway, it's all smoke and mirrors, and these guys are just the elites, and us little fellas will just keep doing what we're doing.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess we just have to grin and bear it and hope that the government are smart enough to back us out of ongoing costs, minimise the expenditure of the existing stuff, and start getting the economy actually back on track.
They just need to cancel them, mate. They need to cancel all of those dumb policies that they said they were going to do. Just cancel them and say, no, we're not doing that anymore. We're saving money, because that's exactly what they were supposed to be doing. They got voted in to be fiscally more responsible with our money. And that doesn't mean printing more, So they've got to do that. They've got to actually halt it and say, no, we're not doing this anymore. This particular project, I had a look, and some of it was Pharmac, I think. And, Pharmac, they don't need any more money. And transport does, but they just need to be a little bit clever about how they're going to spend this money and make sure that we've got the money to spend rather than just printing it, And the way that they do that is to support SMEs to make more money, because if they're making more money, you get more tax. Therefore, you can actually work your way out of the hole as opposed to just digging the hole deeper with a spade,
Exactly. And as usual, Marcus, you've cut right through all the bullshit and got to the nub of the issue. And
before you start, you have to come over and have a smoke, mate. I'm going to start calling you on it because you haven't come over yet.
No, that's right.
But yes, you're due.
Once my head clears and I've got a bit of bandwidth, then we'll definitely do it. I'm not going anywhere over the Christmas break, so maybe we can catch up during then.
All good.
Yep.
We'll sort something out, mate.
All right, Marcus. Thank you for calling.
All right, buddy. Catch you later.
See you. Good afternoon, Miles. Welcome to Cam's Buddies.
Good afternoon, Cam. How are you today?
Box of birds, getting better and betterer.
Well, at least it's betterer and betterer than the landmines that are currently exploding.
Well, that's exactly what I want to talk about with you, the landmines, or fiscal cliffs, as Christopher Luxon calls them, that the government is discovering on almost a daily basis, and what your thoughts are on those.
Well, let's take a little walk down memory lane. It's 2008, and Helen Clark is about to have an election in November, and Finance Minister Cullen of Rich Pricks fame suddenly buys Kiwi Rail, a stripped-out Kiwi Rail, stripped out of all its cash-producing activities from toll, and he spends $690 million doing it. And this is 4 months, yes, 4 months before a general election which would turf Helen Clark and the left, including Finance Minister Cullen, out of power. So he spent $690 million, and that we haven't even added the $140 million worth of debt and the promise that the tracks needed $460 million worth of upgrades. So financial vandalism is not unknown to the left. They've done this before.
I understand
despicable.
I understand Toll Holdings has a party every year on that date, celebrating how much they ripped off the New Zealand government.
Because Price Waterhouse, who are not slow with these things, valued it a mere few months later at $388 million. So that's just economic vandalism beyond belief. And so that's memory lane. John Key's government subsequently spent $3.5 billion on the railways. So let's consider this current government. This current government has come into power a few short weeks ago, and before they came into power, even when there was a caretaker government, contracts were being signed by bureaucrats that actually were going to rear up their ugly heads and hobble the so-called changes that the national-led coalition wanted to do. And the point I'm trying to make is that this has happened before in New Zealand, and it's solely sheeted home to Labour. And if you look at 3, 5, 10 waters and the fact that people have been signed up to 5-year contracts, and let alone all the buildings and other infrastructure needed, it begins to make me feel very, very sick.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect there's going to be even more landmines out there lying around waiting for someone to stand on them. Labor does have a habit of doing this, and I think what they've done is they've banked on National being the party of the status quo, which of course they usually are, and them not unwinding anything because it's too hard. But it seems to me that Christopher Luxon and Nicola Willis are prepared to grasp the nettle and yank it out by the roots and start a bonfire on all of this ridiculous expenditure. And, you know, that is pleasing to see.
Oh, look, we need it. We desperately need it. It's better to lance the boil. These costs that Labor has tried to make permanent are things that are going to cripple the country in the long term. And I commend National. I think that we are seeing some real steel here, and they're prepared to actually pay the price, to pay these people out of contract. And I think that any contract signed by a caretaker government, which basically Labor was while the coalition negotiations were going on, all those contracts need to be scrutinised because I don't think they had the authority to sign them.
Well, that's right. I mean, you can't sign people up for 5-year contracts in the last, effectively the last 3 months or 6 months of your government with an election bearing down on you. All of those things should be null and void. And the government should say, well, okay, we're going to sack you all. Here's a month's pay. See you later. And if you don't like that, well, sue us. We've got lots more money because we've just saved it from all of your salaries.
Yep, and it's not only the poor people that got sucked in by Labor trying to embed things. It should be the civil servants as well. They should be paying the price for this. I'm extremely angry that civil servants were signing contracts right up into the last few days and even after the election that affected outcomes years in advance. And I think they knew that to get out of these contracts, there was going to have to be some sort of payment of, and I just find that really irresponsible.
It's totally irresponsible, but that's what Grant Robertson has done to us. Him and Ardern and Hipkins have beggared the nation and then gaslit us along the way, saying that they're good custodians of the New Zealand economy, and the evidence suggests that they're not.
Yeah, everything we heard is, oh, yeah, this is great. And listen, I lay the blame fairly at the feet of the mainstream media as well. What on earth sort of a job they were doing? I'll tell you what job they were doing. They were just singing the praises, and they weren't doing their job looking into it. Because the other thing that I'd like to raise is not only the landmines where contracts were signed for people's employment with the likes of Three Waters and other ideological pushes like centralising the polytechs and instituting a Maori health authority. All of that was ideological, and contracts were signed so that it was going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to go back. I'd also like to look at some of the funding decisions that Robertson made. He's clearly short-funded a lot of projects. And what this means is that projects were set up, funded for a year or some other short term, and then in the economic statements, the funding for these in the long term wasn't taken into account simply because he'd set up a project but only funded it for a short time. And that's the other sort of economic vandalism. It just beggars belief, really.
Well, it beggars belief, but it doesn't really. That's the thing. I mean, you know, Grant Robertson, I think, is going to go down in history as New Zealand's worst finance minister, which is really saying something because Rob Muldoon made a pig's ear of finance when he was the finance minister. And for Grant Robertson to do worse than him is quite some achievement.
It's shocking, in fact. It seems that everywhere that you look, there's been financial mismanagement of the economy. And is it any wonder we're in the doldrums? All this money is being shoveled into non-productive areas. I mean, we need to actually hold our heads up, bite the bullet, get rid of all this ideological claptrap that Labor tried to implement with the polytechs, with the 3, 5, 10 waters, and with the health authorities. We need to actually get rid of that and get back to basics with actual value propositions and measurement of successes. I mean, don't forget one of the first things that Labor did when they took over in the health area was remove all those measuring sticks which used to be published so that you could tell how good your DHB was doing against targets. Well, that all went. We can't have those targets. Ideologically, it's not right.
Yeah, I mean,
good Lord.
What gets measured gets done, and if you're not measuring it, nothing gets done. And we've seen that the health system go backwards, despite multi-billions of dollars. I mean, where did the $1.9 billion for mental health go? Has anything been built? Have we got anything extra for it?
I think they've got a very flash building in Gisborne that added, 2 beds for millions of dollars spent. I mean, it beggars belief. And everywhere it seems that you look in the economy, the government has pursued an ideological pathway, and that ideological pathway has been poorly thought out and poorly funded in many cases, and this is what I'm calling the fiscal cliff. The landmines are the likes of 3, 5, 10 waters where contracts have been signed, but fiscal cliffs are where the money literally runs out and you've got all this infrastructure and people, but no budget going into the future. I mean, how on earth is that not economic vandalism?
Yep. Well, I'm starting to have serious thoughts that we need a rewrite of the Fiscal Responsibility Act with some pretty hefty penalties. And I'm not talking fines because they're always mitigated and talked their way out of it. I think the penalties should be prison and prohibition from holding public office ever again permanently if they cause fiscal mischief like these guys have done.
And, it's not the first time. That's my point. In 2008, Cullen did a very good job of spending every last red cent.
And he gloated about it too. He said, we've spent it all, the cupboard's bare.
And that's right. And how on earth did he get away with that? And John Key's government was on the back foot from the very beginning, and austerity programs, etc. So guess what's going to happen now? We're on the back foot, economically speaking, right now. And the national government is going to work with its partners in ACT and its partners in New Zealand First, and they're going to deliver a program, and it's going to be tough, and you could call it austerity, but it's going to be economically responsible, and we're going to get New Zealand back on track. And then everyone's going to go, oh, man, those years were tough, but we're doing well now. And guess what? Oh, they're going to try and elect a Labor government again, because the mainstream media is going to, once again, highlight people living in cars, something they never did under the Labor government.
No, or living in motels as they are now. I mean, that's the thing, is that
correct?
The media are part of the problem. And I guess that's why...
exactly my point.
I guess that's why Reality Check Radio exists.
And Reality Check Radio is enabling this message of economic vandalism to get out there, and people can really think about whether their taxpayer money is getting value at the level of, say, for example, the polytechs, where my dollars have gone to spend on a centralised management system, flash salaries, new cars. And what about the courses on the ground? I'd rather do something to improve productivity. What about welding courses? What about mechanics courses? No. The money's gone on free bureaucrats and however many brand new cars.
Oh, and you just have a look at the amalgamated polytechs with their, Pukeko name or whatever it is. And there's all these brand new Mazdas running around, all sign written up. That would have cost an absolute fortune. I'm not sure how all these polytechs need to have all these people with cars.
And the funny thing is, they're not actually part of the polytechs. They're part of some sort of ideologically centralised management group. It's just exasperating in the extreme.
Then there's our favourite bugbear, Te Tari Pūreki, the Tari Pūkeko, as I like to call it, the Firearms Authority that spent millions of dollars on branding and everything. Now they're all going to have to change it and actually call it what everybody should call it, the Firearms Safety Authority.
And that's another thing where there are some real fiscal cliffs in that Firearms Safety Authority. Is there any funding for it to continue? I seriously doubt it. And the problem that they're going to get is they've seriously underestimated the amount of budget they need. And this is reflected not only in this department, but in many other of the ideologically driven schemes that Labor has, or centralisation schemes that Labor has instituted.
Yep.
And I'm afraid to say that I think that this is going to hurt a lot of people, and a lot of people are going to be angry because you can't change these schemes without affecting people's jobs. And that anger should rightly be directed at Grant Robertson, Jacinda Ardern and Hitkins. And I hope, and this is my fervent belief, that these people never touch the reins of power again.
Well, let's hope so. I mean, there's some serious things that have gone wrong here. And I hope that Christopher Luxon, as the Prime Minister, doesn't shirk his responsibilities in holding those responsible to account.
I think that there is going to be some steel needed, and I think there's going to be a lot of squealing, because I'm sorry to say I think people are going to suffer because they are going to lose their jobs, because it's been poorly thought out by the left. It's, as I said, I'm harping on, it's an ideological project, and the centralisation hasn't worked. It's cost more money, and much more money, than any purported savings. And like I said, there's fiscal cliffs where the money will just run out, and it's going to be terrible.
And I think you're absolutely right. And that's about all we've got time for today with Cam's Buddies. So we'll be having one more show next week, and we'll have some sort of, Christmas and New Year type topic for the buddies. What do you think?
Sounds fantastic. Let's have a what are you doing on your holidays topic?
Yeah, something like that. Something a bit light rather than the serious stuff.
Yes, indeed.
All right, thank you. And I'll talk to you next week, Miles. Thank you.
Thank you.
My buddy's just awesome. They never, ever let me down. And there's a few cold, hard truths there for sure. Tell us who you think is the best of Cam's Buddies and why by emailing inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
RCR is on a mission to revive honest media, and now you too can be an integral part of it by joining the RCR Foundation Members Club. Receive exclusive benefits only available to club members, including your own backstage pass to join the hosts for interactive behind-the-scenes discussions, along with our all-new daily curated news summary, RCR Bites, that's delivered to your email box every morning, keeping you on the pulse of the news that matters in just a few minutes per day. To find out more, visit realitycheck.radio/members to see how you can join the mission that's making a difference.
You're listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio. Our text machine is now live. Send us your thoughts by texting your message to 2057. That's 2057. So get in touch with us now.
Right, now it's time for my favourite part of the show, the mailbag. And here's last week's feedback on my monologue. Cam, it's quite simple for me. Don't take the oath. You're not completed the due process as an employee, so you don't get the role. Refuse, and we will find someone else willing to serve the people who understands the process as part of your role. It's like completing your employment contract. These numpties need reminding of where they are and who their employer is. And Amanda also says, love your buddies' chats every week. Hope you're feeling better. Yes, Amanda, I'm feeling a lot better, but you can still hear I'm a bit stuffed up in the head. Some general feedback. Who's singing, Cam? She's quite good. Good show. Cheers, Bert. Bert, that song was Get Free by Lana Del Rey. Now, my interview with Fletcher Tabito. It's time we all referred to them not as Maori, but biracial, as 90% of Kiwis are exactly that. It's only the Asians that generally are not, and they are usually immigrants anyway. That's from Anonymous. Ruth sends in a message, says, I just listened to Cam's interview with Fletcher. What a nice conversation, especially the discussion about the reprehensible behaviour of Te Pāti Māori. If they didn't get the airplay from the gutter press, they'd slink away, or at the very least just shut up and do their job. That pink-suited cowboy hat-wearing leader is a complete stirrer and grandstander. Their antics just solicit disgust and antagonism. We want unity, not division, but they don't seem to have read that memo. Hope you're fully recovered from your mishap and keep up the good fight. And my interview with George Wood, Anonymous says, hi Cam, there are a lot of crossings going up along Te Atatu South in Auckland. Madness. And Trevor writes in and says, congratulations on a wonderful interview with George Wood. I live in Christchurch but take an interest in Auckland as much as I can. This was a fantastic listen because your knowledge on the goings-on at Auckland Council, coupled with George's straight-shooting narrative, gives me, and all those who listen, some understanding of local body politics. We have serious problems here in Christchurch as well, but no one, that I've found, seems to shine a light on them in a similar way to that which you and George did in this chat. I live in hope, so thank you both. Well, Trevor, if you're listening, perhaps you could send in some suggestions of some local body politicians in Christchurch that we can have a chat to. Now, Libby says about Cam's buddies, on Cam's comments that the Maori Party are calling Shane Jones old, since when was it okay in true Maoridom to dissect your elders? Would never happen on a marae. That's a good point, Libby. And Bonnie says, if we have these wonderful drug detection dogs in our prisons and airports doing such a wonderful job, I think we should be training lie detection dogs for Parliament and council meetings. But instead of just sitting, let's teach them to bite. A whole new world of honesty should open up. Have a great day. That's a fantastic solution, Bonnie. And I'm partial to that. Maybe we could get Mark Mitchell to have a word about that. He used to be a dog handler for the police, so should know a bit about it. And that's the mailbag from this week.
This is The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy, right here on RCR.
Right, that's it for The Crunch this week. Daniel Newman is another local body politician who seems to have his head screwed on correctly. It's great to hear from people like him as they make a demonstrable difference in their communities, while at the same time being mindful of the impact of large decisions, both fiscally and politically. And Simon Lusk gave us an insight about what Labour should be doing to recover their support after losing half of their vote in just 3 years. Their options are limited, but Simon reckons they really need to invest in polling, some more polling, and more polling on top of that. This is the penultimate Crunch show of the year, one to go, and that is promising to be a real cracker. It's been a blast so far, and I really love putting the show together for you each week. If you're using the RCR app, you can easily get all our replays as well as listen live. And a big thanks for the team that put together this show and make it all work. It's been a real pleasure having you all back again this week. I love your feedback, really enjoy talking to so many people, sharing their thoughts on politics and everything else that comes to mind. But more importantly, a big shout out to all of you, and thank you for listening and having faith in me as we continue to explore what I think is the beautiful game of politics. Don't forget to email suggestions to inbox@realitycheck.radio for people for me to interview, and let's make this the best political show in New Zealand. Stay tuned for a breakfast show repeat coming up next, with features including Money Talks with David James, who's in for my buddy Farzan Irani, who's having a little break. I look forward to having you join me again next Thursday at 4 p.m. for The Crunch with Cam Slater.
You've been listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater. Remember, you can check out the replays for today's show on our website at www.realitycheck.radio/replays. Tune in every Thursday at 4 p.m. for more with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.